Good evening. I would like to call tonight's meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Searcy,
Here.
Councilmember Landman,
Here.
Councilmember Dabala,
Present.
Councilmember Schlegel,
Here.
Councilmember Gilbert,
Here.
Councilmember Honzak,
Present. Present. Can you hear me?
yes, and
Thank you.
Councilmember Wesselek.
Here.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone. This evening, we have a bit of a packed agenda. We have a proclamation recognizing Black History Month, a legislative update from Ann Seacott, our legislative advocate, as well as a voting session this evening, the second reading ordinance approving the FY26 Budget Amendment number 3. And we also have 3 work sessions this evening. The first is tenant protections overview and discussion. The second is planning for the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center redevelopment. And then the last work session this evening is proposed amendments to Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 14.12 to the noise ordinance. In terms of upcoming agendas, on Wednesday, February the 11th, the council will meet at its normal time of 7:30. We will begin with a legislative update from Ann Seacott. We will then have 2 presentations that evening. The first is presentations from Tacoma Park Business Associations, Long Branch Business League, Old Tacoma Business Association, and the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority. We will also have a presentation on the quarterly financial report, and that's the second quarter, October to December 2025. We will have a voting session that evening. It's a first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code to expand the homeowner property tax credit program. And then we will have work sessions that evening. The first is draft resolution, follow-up to the council compensation committee recommendations, followed by a work session on the city council term limit discussion. Just for my colleagues, that was something that was kind of discussed as part of the council compensation committee, but it's different, so I wanted to make sure there was some distinction there in case there were different paths. And then on February the 14th is Valentine's Day, and February the 16th is President's Day. City offices and facilities are closed Sunday and Monday for the President's Day holiday. Wednesday, February the 18th is packed. We will start at 7:30. We'll begin with a proclamation recognizing February the 23rd as Lee Jordan Day. We will have an update from our legislative advocate, Ann Seacott. We will have a presentation, update on progress towards development and implementation of the Community Connectors program. And then we will have a series of voting sessions. The first is second reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code to expand the homeowner property tax credit program, resolution affirming support for employee access to stress management and peer support services without fear of retaliation, and the first reading ordinance amending Tacoma Park Code Chapter 14.12 noise. We will also have 2 work sessions that evening. The first is authorization to expend grant funds for the Maryland Facade Improvement Program. And then the second is discussion of resolution updating the status of recommendations to the council by the task force to reimagine public safety. We had a closed session on January the 29th, 2026, and I'm going to read the summary from that meeting per the requirements under the Open Meetings Act. On January the 29th, 2026, the City Council convened on Zoom at 6:05 p.m. to vote to enter into closed session pursuant to Maryland Code 3-305 BII and 3-305B7 to meet with the attorney auditor conducting the audit related to Cooper v. City of Tacoma Park. Councilmember Honzak moved to convene the closed session. Councilmember Gilbert seconded the motion. The motion carried. Voting for Mayor Searcy, Councilmembers Landman, Dabala, Schlegel, Gilbert, Honzak, and Wesselek. The council reconvened on Zoom for the closed meeting at 6:20 p.m. Present for the closed meeting were Mayor Searcy, council members Landman, DeBala, Schlegel, Gilbert, Honzak, and Wesselek, City Clerk Carpenter, Deputy City Manager Hupty, and Auditor Bernadette Sargent, Esquire of Stinson LLP. Ms. Sargent briefed the council on the status of the privileged and confidential audit related to Cooper v. City of Tacoma Park and provided advice regarding the same. No actions or votes were taken. The meeting was adjourned at 8:50 p.m. The council did not reconvene in open session after the meeting. Next, I will read for the record proclamation of February as Black History Month. Whereas Black History Month provides an opportunity to recognize the sacrifices and honor the notable achievements and significant contributions of African Americans to the nation's economic, cultural, spiritual, and political progress. And whereas the 2026 national theme for Black History Month is a century of Black history commemorations in honor of the 100th anniversary of the first Black History Week, 1926 through 2026, highlighting a century of efforts to study, document, and celebrate Black history. And whereas the City of Tacoma Park recognizes that racial and ethnic diversity enriches our community and acknowledges the challenges that African Americans face in achieving equity, opportunity, and social mobility. And whereas we also recognize Tacoma Park's history of segregation, racial covenants, and discrimination that contributed to lower rates of home ownership and lower incomes in the city's Black community. And whereas diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging continue to be priorities for the city, and we are committed to working with our community to eradicate racism in all forms to provide an inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable future for all. And whereas in light of today's political climate, it is imperative that we reaffirm our commitment to embracing diversity, fostering inclusivity, and standing against all forms of discrimination and injustice. Now, therefore, I, Talisha Searcy, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, do hereby proclaim February 2026 as Black History Month in the City of Tacoma Park and encourage all residents this month and throughout the year to learn, observe, celebrate, and honor Black history and culture. And next, do we have Ann on the line?
Yes, I am here.
Great. All right.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Happy February, happy Black History Month, happy Wednesday. I would like to report on a few things. So the city has expressed its support for a couple of the major immigration bills that the General Assembly is considering. And the one related to prohibiting this local jurisdictions from entering into 287G agreements with ICE has passed. It passed the Senate bill passed the Senate, the House bill passed the House. So it's not a done deal until they cross over. But that bill is moving with a great deal of speed and intent and purpose. So that's very good news. Also, the Senate has passed a version of the bill prohibiting face coverings for law enforcement. And the House bill will be heard later this month. So those are two bills that the city's weighed in on in support of. The city has also submitted testimony opposing legislation to prohibit certain transgender people from young people from being able to play on sports teams. And we have also submitted testimony in favor of bills to try to make it create an individual unit water meter system, much like individual gas meters exist, so utility meters. So we'll see where that bill goes, but we think that's going to be helpful to folks, tenants. And speaking of tenants, and I know you've got an item later this evening on some of these issues, we do have now our good cause legislation has been reintroduced. Both the Senate version and the House version have been introduced. We've got a Senate bill hearing already coming up next week. So we'll get moving on some testimony in support of that, of course. Those are the highlights. Happy to answer questions about other things. Of course, while it's not necessarily something that city weighed in on, everybody's been hearing in the news how the House did pass a redistricting plan that the Senate seems completely uninterested in. So we'll see where that goes too.
Great. Thank you so much, Ann. I've been pinged by some residents asking about whether or not there's a need to put some pressure on the senators in the state around redistricting. So that will be interesting to see how that unfolds. Question about good cause. Do we know whether or not the two versions are extremely different? Or are they just including a couple of little things, or is this going to be a case again?
Right now they're the same.
Oh, okay.
As introduced. We are aware that in the Senate there remains, as there was the last couple of years, a desire to try to amend the bill, and there are discussions going on around where there might be some common ground. But I think that in general, the House and the Senate remain in really kind of two different stances on the bill as a whole.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Ann? All right. Seeing none. Awesome. All right. Oh, Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you. I believe I'm unmuted. This may be a question to which you don't have an answer, but if you did know, I'd be interested. Do you have any sense of how many states approximately, a bunch, a few, are tackling the 287G issue the way our state is, and how that's faring across the country?
I do not know that. I'm happy.
Okay, sorry, I know that's a surprise question. It's very exciting to see it moving forward. And the masking, any sense of that, how common that is? I'm just curious if we're one of the front runners, or and whether this might invite a lot of attention from the federal government or not. Because of that.
I don't know an exact number. I do believe we're at the maybe not in the lead, but we're in the early part of the pack. I think it will probably bring some attention to the state from the federal government. I don't know how much more, but
no, I was
you're
just
paying
curious.
attention anyway. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, sure. No, I'm not so much worried. I was just curious how much we're likely to come right sharply into focus compared to other states that are already getting attention. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak, and I will be closely watching what's happening in the federal space, because I know that the masking is a topic that's being discussed also within Congress. Councilmember Landman.
I wanted to give an answer to that question based on what my earlier research was. We are not the first. California was the first out of the starting gate, and their legislation was enacted, and then they agreed to put pause to its implementation until it had made its way through a court proceeding in California. The court heard the case in mid-January. I have not read that a decision has been rendered, but at the time that we were looking at supporting this legislation, there were about 15 states that had pending legislation on this topic, and they were not all Democratic-controlled states. There were a handful of states that had Republican-controlled state legislatures that were also considering unmasking legislation.
Thank you, Councilmember Landman.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Seeing no more lights, thank you very much, Ann. We appreciate you. And I want to make sure that I end every legislative update with appreciation to our working group, Councilmember Landman, Dabala, and Wesselek. The bill chart is growing exponentially, and the fact that you all are continuing to do this work and making sure that our voices are heard is very appreciated. All right. Excellent. Okay, we're going to move to public comments this evening on voting items. The voting items this evening is second reading ordinance approving FY26 budget amendment number 3. Any public comments on voting items? Nope. Okay, do we have any general public comments this evening?
Good evening. Sue Miller, Ward 3. First, I want to thank Councilmember Landman and the mayor for being at our community resistance event tonight. One of the thin silver linings of the past year is the way longtime and new community groups have been working together. I'm here tonight to make one very specific point, a point I've been making for a while now. I want to urge our city to acknowledge each abduction by federal agents that occurs in our city. We need to do so in order to educate privileged residents about what is happening. We need to do so in order to affirm the impacted families, to let them know that we see what is happening to our neighbors and we care. And we need to do so in order to create a historical record of what is happening here. These are unprecedented times. As a city taxpayer, having my city discuss how we are going to acknowledge specific abductions and how our police department and community should interact over this is more important to me than the noise ordinance or even the budget. I think we could all agree that there is nothing more important than what is happening to our neighbors right now. And I think it would make sense to have an update every week on what has happened in our city this week. The silence of the city on these specific abductions in our city projects an image that all is normal here. And that has been really hard for residents to get their minds around. To take just one case, I am still haunted by the abduction of a man at a gas station in Tacoma Park last August. Masked men in an unmarked SUV with blacked out windows took him away. In this case, we know what happened because a reporter who was getting gas witnessed it, wrote it up, and published it. She even got the federal agency to acknowledge the name of the person they abducted, but the city remained silent, as if it hadn't happened. What happened to this man? What happened to his family? Does anyone in the city know? These are not rhetorical questions, and I look forward to the answers. There are now at least a dozen such abductions that have happened in our city and that have been documented by residents since the start of the summer, but only one has been acknowledged by the city. Why? Not listing them, not noting them in the week they happen, gives a false impression that nothing is happening here. Last week, in refusing to put this topic on the agenda for tonight, the mayor asked for concrete actions that the city still needs to take. And in the chief's strong statement last week, which I appreciated, he wrote that unlawful conduct, quote, will not be normalized. The first step then is to acknowledge when this unlawful conduct happens, recording the fact of these abductions without need for names, just one line, stating that they happened in our city, is an overdue step. Please take that step now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any virtual public comments, general public comments?
Yes, we have one. One moment, please. Right, we have Mayor Arobo.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to join and provide my thoughts. I have to admit they aren't as prepared as the individual that spoke before me, but I just wanted to very briefly share my concerns and around well, first, I'll actually start off with my huge thanks and gratitude to the Department of Public Works that has, I see, worked tirelessly to clear our streets and roadways and make for safe roads and sidewalks for pedestrians. I think they did a great job throughout the storm. Unfortunately, I have had other experiences outside of this week that have involved reports and requests for repair to different structures and areas within the city, and have been given the runaround. And it seems like there's a disconnect, particularly around work that has to do with, in my experience, like bus shelters and structures, things that may be shared by more than one jurisdiction. And I just wanted to highlight how severe or how severely difficult it was to get a hold of someone for one, and to get answers. And this issue, I was reminded of it, but it's not a recent issue. It's actually something that has not been resolved since I made that phone call back in the summer. So this was just my attempt to highlight this experience and to highlight what may have already, what others may already be aware of or be experiencing. I know that I am not alone in this, as far as conversations that I have with some of my neighbors and community members, as far as progress that they see with things that may be managed by this department.
Thank you. And can we get your name one more time?
My first name is Mur, last name Arobo.
Arobo. Thank you very much for expressing this concern. I appreciate it. Okay. And the council member representing her will get the email. Perfect. Do we have the ward information? Okay. The city clerk will share it with the appropriate council member. Okay. Any other general public comments? Okay. All right. All right, wonderful. So we are going to move to council comments. Do we have any council comments this evening? All right. Councilmember Gilbert.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Just a quick reminder to the community of the Manna Food distribution that's going to take place on February 9th. That's next Monday, approximately 12:30 at the Franklin Apartments. That's 7620 Maple Avenue. I'm not sure if anyone recalls my request for some more volunteers to help deliver the food at that location, but if anyone has the capacity, has the time, please come on out and help as we try to deliver these the food boxes to the families in need. At a meeting with Juneteenth committee last night, Maple Avenue Community Association, they're in the early works of organizing the Juneteenth celebration. I'll share details as we move forward. They're still kind of working things out, but we also had a really good conversation about, I'm not sure if you all remember Calvin Avant, who was a former youth outreach worker in the late 80s, early 90s, who had done tremendous work in our community, and the possibility of a living dedication to him in some locations. So I'll share more information about that, but as we move forward. But I'd really like to get some support on something for him. But yeah, it was a good conversation last night, and it's good to see that they're interested in it as well as I am. A quick thank you to our former Mayor Kate Stewart, who is our current County Council member for District 4, and her staff, Cecily Thorne, who's her Chief of Staff. I made a request to her to take a look at how we, as a county, deal with our regulations on breeding dogs. And I've spoken before about my passion on animals and my experience with my most recent dog that passed away in September. And I've since learned a lot about these dogs that are being bred that have these breathing issues, and it's disturbing to me. And I've shared it with my colleagues, and I appreciate you all for indulging me on it, especially you, Council Member Landman, in your response, which gave me an idea to reach out to Council Member Stewart, because this is probably better addressed at the county level, since animal control is something that they deliver to most of the county, and we don't have our own animal control. So she received my plea and the information I provided, and an ordinance that was passed in California, Ojai, California, if anyone's ever heard of it, that restricts breeding of these dogs. They're called Brachycephalic dogs. I almost have a hard time pronouncing that name, but those are your French bulldogs, your pugs, your bulldogs, and some breeds of cats that are born with this inherent issues in breathing, and if not addressed with an expensive doctor's bill, they'll have miserable lives. I'm not sure if you ever come close to some of these dogs and seen them breathe. It's kind of difficult to watch if you know what they're experiencing. So she's responded, and they're going to be taking a good look at this, and hopefully we'll have some movement and some better ways that we can restrict the breeding of these animals. So I look forward to what's forthcoming there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Gilbert. Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you. I learned a new word this week, snowcrete. I wish I had never learned this word, and I'm not the only one. I want to thank the city staff, and I want to thank all the Ward 2 residents for your patience and for your helping each other in any way possible to get everybody unstuck. Things that were not improved in this unusual storm by a water main break. There's been several, but the one that I am a block and a half from was the one that preoccupied me. When this is all over, weather-wise, I think it would be helpful, City Manager, if the city and the various agencies were able to get together and just go over what the emergency plan is. I think the city staff know, but I'm not convinced, having been out and about in this past week, that everybody's on the same page. And when it happens is not the time to figure it out, as we all know. So I would appreciate that, and then maybe also a snow lessons learned just within the city. Those two things might be very helpful in preparing us for future emergencies of this sort. And thank you to the staff that put the AE traffic calming meeting together, because I found it very, very helpful. And for someone else will probably say this, but the information and the recording will be online. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Hanzak.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know whose ward Mer Arobo is in, but because I appreciate Ms. Arobo, you coming forward about the issue of bus shelters and expressing your appreciation for the extreme work of our public works team. I think what I'll do is I'll just say I concur with Councilmember DeBala. I would very much like to request that we ask for a snow lessons learned once this is truly behind us, and is definitively not at all behind us. And our staff must be very, very tired at this point. Just to see also how we might be able to think about these kinds of extreme events in the future, and whether there's anything else that we, the council, can do to support you, to make ourselves as prepared as possible, knowing that although they may be few and far between, we will be getting more of these kinds of snowcrete kinds of bizarre events moving forward. So, and I did observe that, perhaps we could be helpful in considering as a council or as a staff, how we think about where the priority might lie with respect to things like high density pedestrian zones or bus shelters, in addition to the roads. The roads have to be clear, but we also have to get pedestrian areas clear, and we need to think about how those things come together. And then on the issue of abductions, I did just want to acknowledge that you are heard, you are well heard. I have struggled with this issue as a council member because I have personally received calls from the families who have been impacted at times. And I know that some of my other fellow council members probably have as well. I know the mayor has. And I'll allow the mayor to elaborate, but in so much as my opinion on this is relevant, I know that since I'm a Spanish speaker, I know people might wonder why I don't have more to say about it. It is extremely important to me that we get our facts straight too. And I'm so grateful to the community. I keep a close eye on each and every thread that comes in terms of the amount of information we are getting or are not getting, and how many different ways I don't have to validate anything until or if someone personally reaches out to me. Maybe it would be helpful for me to share with you in general. I've heard, for example, before, of building managers who have talked about somebody who's moved out, and it's sort of unknown, what exactly happened. And that's a good example of where it's real tricky. Even when you call the building manager, you try to get more information, there's only so much too that they can provide to you. Even if you happened to hear about that. So I am very, very keenly aware that many of you community members are working on these issues, and I am extremely, eternally grateful and hoping that you will keep us abreast also, and we can work with you as much as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember Landman.
Thank you, Mayor Searcy. I also want to begin by acknowledging and thanking Ms. Miller for her comments. I agree with you that we need some kind of system for recognizing and acknowledging what's going on. The system may not be one that involves the city making official reports. It might be something that we could devise where we call on the residents that are doing such a fantastic job on an informal basis of keeping these records to share with us on a regularly scheduled basis what you are learning, so that we can have an exchange of views. I think it once again highlights the importance of continuing communication between the elected officials, the staff of the city, and the community members and leaders who are working so hard to protect our fellow residents against the abuses being rained upon us by the federal government. Let me also take a moment to thank the folks that ran the traffic calming meeting the other night. Was it only last night? Which it was helpful to have, but it was a bit frustrating to be virtual but not fully able to see the underlying data that was on hand. So I look forward to that information being published. And I have to say that when we do this next time, I think we should perhaps be more clear in telling people what things to request, so that we don't wind up with so many people making requests thinking that they have a system that is serving their needs, and then discovering at the time when they think they're going to hear how it fits in that their needs are not the ones covered by the system. So I think we can fix that problem, but I suspect that in Ward 1 there were quite a number of frustrated people last night, and I think we should try and work towards a system that makes people happy as opposed to frustrated that we've made this system available. And I also want to say thank you to the police department for taking steps to address concerns that have been raised by residents about the use of the dog park. It's a public resource, and it needs to be shared fairly, and we have to make sure that people know about and adhere to the rule that no one handler can have more than 3 animals in that dog park at one time, so that it can be safely used by everyone. And I also want to echo my colleagues who thank the Public Works Department for their amazing work. One hole I see in this system is that it seems as though commercial and large-scale residential land users or owners or operators in our city did not step up to the plate the way that many of the homeowners did, or people who in individual residents did manage to clear their walkways long before some of those big buildings. So I look forward to a system where we let them know as part of our emergency planning that they have an obligation, and then we won't all be stepping over big piles of snow as we walk past big apartment buildings and commercial buildings. And that is not the fault of the city's staff. That's not their job, but maybe we can do better in keeping those folks informed about their responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lamb and Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you. Thank you to Sue Miller for your proposal. I agree with your proposal, and I know you've raised this before. So I hope that our city can find a way as soon as possible to publish weekly updates of immigration enforcement actions that have been reported to the city, directly observed by our personnel or confirmed after the fact by city personnel, as was the case with the apprehension of 2 individuals outside the Aldi on Sunday around noon. And I'm very appreciative that Chief Duvall passed along the information about that incident after it was circulating on social media. My concern is that while I could forward a report like that to people who get my updates, that's not being disseminated as equitably as would be the case if they were somehow accessible through the website. Certainly there are questions about what constitutes fully validated information worthy of going into a historical record. So perhaps providing a link to another clearinghouse's reports, as Councilmember Landman just alluded to, and having the city contribute to those reports would be an acceptable path to all concerns. Such a link could be cited on a city page with other resource links for immigrants and others needing information and paths to assistance. So there'd be a way to reach it, just as when we direct people to another mutual aid organization, we're not vouching for the accuracy. We're not putting the city's full credibility on the line. Speaking of observing incidents, I'm sure my colleagues saw that yesterday New York Attorney General Letitia James announced a project called the Legal Observation Project, and it is going to be a new initiative to monitor and document federal immigration enforcement activity in New York State. They'll be collecting reports of enforcement actions throughout New York and sending trained personnel to observe and document that activity where appropriate. So those legal observers will serve as neutral witnesses on the ground. I'm getting this from the official announcement. So I know that we had a somewhat lengthy discussion last week about whether to put a resolution on a work session. I just wanted to point out that as it'll be good to keep considering whether there are paths that other jurisdictions are taking in terms of safely monitoring and signaling that the monitors are not out to cause harm. They're going to be wearing purple uniforms in New York, so they're clearly identifiable as observers.
May I just ask, this is the state?
This is the state of New York, yes. Last thing real quick, I participated in the sidewalk and traffic calming request meeting last night with a number of my colleagues. Thank you to the staff. There were a number of types of projects that were pushed into other categories, and in some cases it wasn't entirely clear what those processes would be in the future for dealing with those requests. So any more clarity we can get will be great and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Schlegel. Casey, if there's any more. Okay. So I want to thank those who came out and provided comments this evening. I want to echo my colleagues in support of us doing a look back of the snow response. I will say, I know people in other jurisdictions that thought that we did fantastic.
No criticism.
There were people who were trapped in their homes in Prince George's County, and their streets had not been cleared at all. And then they come over here, and they're like, what? So our amazing public works staff did a fantastic job, absolutely amazing job, especially given the circumstances. But there were a couple of pain points that I definitely think if we kind of do some look backs, we may be able to make sure that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities, homeowners understanding that they're responsible for clearing the sidewalks, making sure that business owners and landlords know how to make sure that their tenants are protected. And also the bane, I think, of a lot of our existence is a bus shelter maintenance that isn't quite necessarily the city's responsibility, but we get the calls and we want to make sure that folks that are using public transportation, which we value as a community, can do so safely. So if we can definitely get some feedback from staff on ways that we can even leverage the little bit of political capital that we have to try to make sure that folks are doing their parts to keep these bus shelters clear and available to residents during winter weather like this will be much appreciated. Ms. Sue Katz Miller, thank you for bringing your feedback. I know that Councilmember Honzak mentioned and the fact that she and I have been tag teaming a lot of these issues over the last year. I think it is really important for us to recognize that in many instances, the city has no idea that someone has been abducted. No idea. We are not getting information from ICE. We have usually, and I will tell you firsthand what I've gotten a text message from someone who's recording something, or I've gotten a link to some Facebook notification, or someone has said, hey, do you know that this is happening in such and such place? We've developed some informal kind of connects to try to figure out how to shuffle that information around. But the reality is we don't know. And it's not just the city that doesn't know. The state doesn't know. The county doesn't know. No one knows. ICE comes in, they grab people. We have no idea that it's ICE, that they've grabbed people. They're not telling us. And unless members of the community know those individuals feel comfortable with their information being shared, and they want that information out there, we may never know. So while I appreciate the desire for us all to try to make sure that we're able to gather more information, I think it is important for us to also recognize that, you know, we are in a difficult place in terms of not just being able to verify what accounts we're hearing, but in many instances, there's tons of things that we never hear about. And so while we are, as we learn, I will say the incident that happened over the weekend, a business owner messaged me about it. That's how I found out about it. The important thing for us all is to make sure that we're continuing to stress. I know that Deputy City Manager Eubanks and myself participate in regular meetings with the state immigration staff to stress the importance of them leveraging their resources to be able to gather some information. Like, can we get more information from ICE? Can we get more information from others so that we can have a better understanding of, even if we don't know the specific individuals, at least if we could get some information about who is, or the number of individuals that are being picked up. And you know, it's hard for everyone because ICE, unfortunately, is the entity that would have the most data, and they're not talking. So again, I appreciate the desire and recognize the importance of us being able to figure out some ways to do more. And that is definitely something that this council and staff are committed to trying to figure out. But I do also think it's important for us to recognize the limitations that we're facing and others are facing as well when it comes to providing levels of information regarding members of our community, whether or not they're members of our community, and also whether or not they have been abducted in the community is something that we struggle to try to address. The terms of stuff that is happening, I want to thank again the Mayor's Innovation Project. I learned a lot this weekend facilitating discussions on aging and some things that we may want to consider in terms of how we're engaging members of our community that are older adults. Also had an opportunity to hear about issues of childcare. It's a panel where there was a lot of communities that are really struggling with trying to figure out ways to address the childcare gap. So that was interesting and very helpful as well. So if there are folks that are interested in hearing about some of the things that communities are doing and some of the resources that I was able to glean, just let me know. And lastly, this weekend, there was a lot of different cancellations, but I think the Kindness Day is still on the calendar
This coming weekend?
for Saturday.
Yes.
So far.
Sunday, so far.
And Playdate, I believe, is still Sunday so far. So we will see. But I definitely look forward to everyone that may be participating in the different events this weekend. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to our city manager for city manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council and all who are joining us this evening. I want to say sincere thanks for the comments, and we appreciate the suggestions with respect to the recent storm. I do want to reassure that Public Works Department, in conjunction with our emergency manager, the city manager's office, and other departments, routinely do extensive pre-planning when major storms are forecast, and Public Works absolutely does perform post-storm debriefings internally and again in conjunction with our emergency manager. We do try to be prepared as best we can prior to an event, and learning from our experiences is our best instructor for the future. Some storms like this one just overwhelm any city of any size's resources, and that's just a reality. And as you know, our employees are out always doing their best, but the scale of some storms are such that there isn't a city that has 100% ability to deal as quickly with some of the outcomes of those storms as residents would like. We absolutely do our best, though.
If I may, it's not what the city's doing, it's what other agencies and folks are not doing. Just to clarify what I meant.
Sure, I understand, and I think the concepts of pre-planning and a hot wash review after an event are sound, and they're a best practice, and they're something that the city has long done, and I just wanted to reassure anyone who might be wondering whether we do that in fact that does occur here. From the Housing and Community Development Department, beginning February 17th, the Junction parking lot in Tacoma Park, west of the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Cooperative, will convert to metered parking with new rules and regulations going into effect for the purpose of improving parking turnover and to ensure space availability for short-term visitors. As part of the new setup, the lot will be open daily from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. with metered parking enforcement beginning at 7 a.m. each day. All visitors using the lot will be limited to a maximum parking time of 2 hours. The west end of the lot will be designated as a loading zone from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. No parking will be allowed in this section during those hours. in order to accommodate delivery and service vehicles, serving primarily other businesses in the neighborhood. Metered parking will be available after 11 a.m. in those loading zone spaces. In addition, 2 spaces at the back of the lot will be reserved, with clear signage posted to indicate restrictions. Drivers are encouraged to check for signs before parking to avoid any fines or towing. Payment for parking will follow the same system used throughout the city. Users can pay via the Park Mobile app on their phones or use the on-site kiosk that will be installed prior to the changeover date. From the police department, join us for Coffee with a Cop on February 11th from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, hosted in partnership with the Metropolitan Police Department 4th District. This will be held at Starbucks at 232 Carroll Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C. Enjoy a cup of coffee while chatting with officers in a relaxed, friendly setting. Whether you have a question, concern, or just want to say hello, we're here to listen to you. From the Recreation Department, the City of Tacoma Park invites all residents and friends to the 16th Annual Midwinter Play Day, scheduled for Sunday, February 8th, from 1 to 4 p.m. at Piney Branch Elementary School at 7510 Maple Avenue. Please visit www.letsplayamerica.org to see the entire list of activities and performances. As the co-founder and executive director, Pat Rumbaugh, the Play Lady, likes to say, everyone deserves to play. And finally, from the city manager's office, a continued shout out. Our Public Works refuse and recycling crew, who resumed trash pickup throughout the community this week, have been dealing with super hard circumstances, such as packed snow and ice, frigid temperatures, and difficulty in accessing and returning refuse bins. All of us so appreciate your hard work and physical discomfort as you do it, and we're very proud of you as a team. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move to our voting session. The first item is the second reading ordinance approving FY26 budget amendment number 3. Just want to check with staff to make sure that there are no changes.
No change.
No changes. All right, would someone like to move the second reading ordinance approving the FY budget amendment number 3?
Moved.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Any points of discussion? Okay, seeing none. All right, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman,
Yes.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Schlegel,
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert,
Yes.
Councilmember Hanzak,
Yes.
Councilmember Wesselek,
Aye.
Mayor Cersey.
Aye. Excellent. Okay, we're going to move to our work sessions this evening. The first is tenant protections overview and discussion. And let's see, is, okay. They're coming. Okay, perfect. All right, okay. Do we need to take a quick break or? Okay, let's take a quick we'll take a quick 5-minute break and then we will reconvene. Good evening. We are reconvening our meeting tonight of the Tacoma Park City Council with our work session, tenant protections overview and discussion. And with that, I will turn things over to our HCD, our new housing manager, Paloma.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Like our mayor said, I will be discussing our tenant protection recommendations brought to you by our Housing and Community Development Department, myself, Paloma Royal Lefebvre, the housing manager. And so with that, just what exactly will this proposal do? We all know Tacoma Park has robust tenant protections and systems in place today, but I'd like to offer improvements to those protections and systems. We're looking to be more proactive and strategic in our approaches while continuing to be partners for landlords and resources for tenants. Now highlighting that last point, we really want to look at ways we can align with both the county and state on a few of these different recommendations because we know consistency does matter in our efforts. A brief overview at a glance. I want to cover a little bit of what our tenant protections within the city look like currently, while outlining 2 through 10 are those recommendations I'd like to put forward, and ending with some next steps for both myself and the council. So our current city tenant protections, we of course have rent stabilization, which looks at limiting rent increases for buildings under rent stabilization to, again, once a year, giving 2 months written notice to tenants. We have our tenant opportunity to purchase law, giving tenants the right to first purchase buildings if it's going for sale. We have one Topol case listed. We saw 3 in 2025. We have different assistance programs throughout the city, one being our renters rebate program, another being our emergency assistance program, which provides rental assistance, utility assistance to residents. We have our Commission on Landlord and Tenant Affairs, commonly known as COLTA, which sees cases brought forth by tenants, tenant associations, and landlords on different issues like legal fees, or security deposit disputes. We also have our landlord tenant mediation program through our department, which works with tenants and landlords on different disputes or issues they see. And of course, we offer technical assistance for tenant organizations looking to organize within their building. Jumping right into our first recommendation for tenant protections, looking at how rent increase notices are provided and what they include. Now, keeping in mind, not all buildings are under rent stabilization, but those that are, we're looking to provide more detailed information in those rent increases and how they are distributed. Under current rules, landlords must issue a rent increase notice, but there is no explicit requirement for proof of delivery, not clear direction on what information must be included, and tenants frequently receive notices either verbally or informally, making it difficult to verify those timelines or percentage calculations or compliance with those timelines. Tenants may receive incomplete notices or nothing in writing. And so undermining enforcement, and disputes related to those increases. Our second recommendation is around temporary displacement updates. Tacoma Park has limited relocation assistance requirements for tenants displaced due to circumstances outside of their control, such as unsafe housing conditions. And while certain emergencies responses exist, there is no robust codified policy that guarantees financial or housing support when tenants must leave due to no-fault circumstances. When enforcing orders requiring units to be vacated, tenants may shoulder temporary housing costs. Landlords may also avoid accountability for substandard conditions because there are no requirements covering tenant displacements. And so really we're looking to redefine when a condemnation takes place and when a public safety official declares the unit unsafe or condemnation takes place. The change would start that 24-hour clock sooner in cases where displacement occurs maybe on a weekend. Our third recommendation is around the Landlord-Tenant Bill of Rights. Currently, landlords are encouraged but not required to provide tenants with a Bill of Rights. Distribution can be inconsistent, and tenants may report never receiving the materials at all, and really outlining their rights and obligations and resources. Without mandatory disclosure, tenants often sign leases without understanding core protections, such as rent stabilization or retaliation laws. And so really looking to be proactive in how we distribute the Tenant Bill of Rights. Our fourth recommendation is around creating a troubled properties program. Tacoma Park does not currently maintain an external list of troubled properties, nor does it have a formal external facing system that identifies buildings with chronic code violations, safety hazards, or repeat noncompliance. And while the department tracks violations internally and code enforcement with Montgomery County Department of Housing, we look to centrally aggregate this information and publish it for tenants. I'd like to note we would be leaning heavily on the county's already existing troubled properties program, and really looking at the scoring, knowing that chipped paint citations would weigh differently than lack of egress citations. And also, again, really leaning into knowing rent increases happen annually, using that as a punitive measure to hold buildings and owners accountable. Our fifth recommendation is around tenant payment methods. There is no specific city or state law that requires landlords to accept specific payment methods. Landlords get to choose how rent and fees are paid. And really, we're looking to lower any existing barriers tenants may face when it comes to paying rent or paying fees. Our sixth recommendation is around condo conversion protections. Tacoma Park has limited governance over condo conversions, and this lack of structure could leave tenants vulnerable during those conversions. Montgomery County has protections under their tenant displacement law that we would want to ensure is followed within the city. We know substantial rehabs can be concerning for tenants, and we want to ensure requirements around conversions and rehabs are followed, and protections for those tenants ultimately. Our seventh recommendation is around eviction notifications, and really looking at increasing communication when they do occur. We know landlords cannot evict tenants without giving them proper written notice, and of course they cannot be evicted without that court order and by appropriate parties, that being the sheriff. The state mandates a written 10-day notice for eviction that we would like to mirror. We're really talking about instances where tenants do not inform our department of an impending eviction, and really wanting to institute systems in place that can help either get resources or opportunities to those tenants and hopefully avoid the eviction altogether if possible. Our eighth recommendation is around emergency contact line requirements. Currently, during the licensing renewal process, the city asks for ownership information and agent contact information, but not emergency lines. And really wanting to be proactive again, ensuring that in cases of emergency, our office and tenants as well have contact information for either on-site staff or emergency lines. Our ninth recommendation is centered around the Commission on Landlord and Tenant Affairs, commonly known as COLTA. Our COLTA commission, like I previously stated, receives complaints from tenants, tenant associations, and landlords. But really looking at who is able to file complaints, we're looking to hopefully give the ability for tenants to stay anonymous during the process, which isn't currently a policy within our COLTA program. And really looking to see if our office can put forth cases allowing tenants to stay anonymous during the process. I'd like to end with some next steps. And so with that, our office will be putting together an ordinance that will be put forth for council at multiple work sessions. Early spring we're looking at, and then come summer 2026, implementation for these policy recommendations, tenant protections, knowing that certain rollouts will take longer and require more of a framework. Winter 2027, we're looking to see implementation data and statuses for all of council as well. With that, I can take questions.
Wonderful. I see Councilmember Honzak's hand is already raised. Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Paloma, or Miss Arroyo. Let's see, how do you pronounce your last name? Arroyo Lefebvre? Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
I haven't. It's a real pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry I'm not there to greet you. Thank you for your presentation. I have been very excited to hear this presentation and the ideas that you were about to put forward. And I'm really delighted to hear some of these recommendations. I think they'll go a long way to helping some of the issues that I've been seeing. That said, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to send these to you in advance. So if you don't have the answer right now, please don't feel compelled to respond immediately. We can discuss later. I just want to lay them on the table. One is, a lot of the issues that I've experienced in relation to some of the things that these changes would address are in the LIHTC buildings that our city owns. And so I'm just wondering, because it's not totally clear to me without digging deeper into the code, whether all of the changes that you've outlined here would apply to LIHTC buildings as well as ours. And I take as a, for example, the emergency and also when you're changing, or sorry, the way that tenants have to pay as well. So that's one of my questions. Another question is, are we going to see a round 2 of looking at differences between perhaps our smaller and our larger buildings? Is that something yet to come, and that was seen as a different stage than this presentation we got tonight? Because I've had some concerns about how tightening up some of our rent stabilization might have undue impact on some of our smaller building owners. And then my final thing, and then you can speak, is I'm wondering if you all have considered or have already somewhere that we could see kind of a side-by-side table that shows, in general terms at least, some of the major similarities and differences between our county tenant protections and our city, so that we, the council, can have a better sense of, whether we're getting closer to the county or a little further away, and where we're tighter or less tight. And I don't know if that's a big lift, but it sounds like a lot of that's in your head, but less so for us, unfortunately. And I think that's sort of helpful for helping us understand if we are moving closer to being similar, if you will. Thank you. And I can put that in writing for you later.
Thank you, council members. So addressing your first question, I do believe, for instance, you gave an example of the LIHTC units, properties in our city. They would fall under most of these tenant protections, knowing, condo conversions, maybe not as much. Certainly emergency contact information. But yes, I think it may not be in the order that you presented, my apologies, but knowing that certain properties are smaller in nature, right, and may not have quite the same ability to adhere with as much ease as larger buildings, knowing the onus would be indue on us and these buildings wanting to be a resource for properties. But yes, that is something we considered, knowing the lift for some of these would look different for smaller buildings, maybe owner-occupied buildings, for instance. It is something we definitely are talking about, and even other council members have brought up, and that we are very much aware of. And I want to say you mentioned rent stabilization.
So I can answer that piece. So anything with rent stabilization is going to be discussed with the policy review that we're doing right now with RSG. There's a whole lot of data that we're starting to work through, and as well as the ordinance itself. And so that'll be part of a more robust conversation. One of the things I'll just quickly highlight here in terms of smaller scale landlords and kind of thinking through these tenant protections, the only one I could think of that we'll want to be very careful about will be the troubled property score. With the other ones, a lot of these are really boiling down to basic obligations that a landlord would have for a tenant who's paying them rent. I understand being a small-scale landlord is a really tough job. I do not envy them. But if there is an emergency at their property, there has to be some way for the tenant to get in touch with them, especially in cases where there might be a loss of heat or power that really affects the residents' safety and well-being.
Thank you for that. And so it sounds, because Councilmember Honzak's question has triggered for me in thinking through next steps. Many of these would apply through the code as it pertains to licensure, right? So if you are a licensed landlord within the city, these are the things that you would have to make sure that you adhere to, versus if you're rent stabilized or you are a LIHTC building or, the like. It's basically if you have a rental license in the city, some of these are just, I agree with you, HCD Director McNally, that yes, this is just core doing business, making sure that there's clear pathways for people to pay you and that they understand what those pathways are, that there's clear pathways in terms of reaching you if your building is on fire. Those kinds of things just are just basic administrative items that are currently gaps that shouldn't be gaps within the city. Councilmember Gilbert.
Thank you. Thank you, Paloma. This was good. I just had a question and comment about your recommendation number 6 in condominium conversion protections. I know I've shared with some of my colleagues and as well as you, Director McNally, the idea of possibly when we start putting together this ordinance, and I guess it would require for all of us to agree up here, but the possibility of council being able to block total condo conversions as well. In the case down the line, we reach a certain percentage citywide where, say, we're already at 50% and we want to make sure that we maintain affordable housing down the line. I don't think that would be a bad idea. So, yeah, just wanted all of us to give that some thought.
Excuse me, Councilmember Gilbert, could you repeat the idea that you just described? I wanted to make sure I heard correctly.
Yeah, sure. There are places within the country right now that have restrictions on how many condo conversions you can have in a specific location. And the interest is to make sure you maintain affordable housing. We don't have any stipulations there, and I think we probably should. And again, we'll probably all be long gone when that happens here. But we've seen some dramatic changes in our condo conversions in the city. And I would hate to see it get to the point where we start having more condos here than we have affordable housing. So I think we should probably have some stipulations in our code that council can step in and stop those conversions, even with Topol.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilbert. Councilmember Landman.
Councilmember Gilbert, that sounds like a question I would want our city attorney to weigh in on. I have 100% agreement in spirit, and my question is what the legal authority would be for us to essentially intervene in a private property transaction. Maybe other cities have got examples we can look at. I'd be very interested to see what they've done. My other question that I wanted to ask you about, and I wrote you about this earlier, and it's also a question for the city attorney, is whether it poses a challenge or a problem of some kind to have a city official appear before the COLTA, which is a body created by the city, paid by the city, and staffed by the city as well. And I understand your desire to be able to have tenants appear, have their needs represented in an anonymous way. So I'm wondering whether you have heard from the lawyers on that and whether they have a better or a less potentially problematic approach for representing tenants anonymously without having somehow the city appear before the city, if you will, because that would raise issues of, appearance of potential conflict. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll admit this one is probably pushing the envelope quite a little bit. And so we'll as part of drafting this ordinance, we'll be working closely with the city attorney's office as we kind of put this is, I'll call it this kind of skeleton of what we're planning to do. And as we draft the ordinance, we're going to be putting more flesh on the bones, so to speak, on kind of how will this work in practice. What's the exact language that we need to do to make sure the intent is made? I think the important piece here is there a way that we can make COLTA a venue that is, that residents are comfortable going to and make it as low of a barrier to bring cases as possible? And so that's kind of the idea there. So there might be some tweaks as we kind of draft this into language that will eventually go into city code, but this is kind of the initial concepts that we've come up with.
Thank you. I have one final question, if I may. It's a quickie. The plan to have eviction notification to the city occur more robustly, is that something that can be extended to evictions that are occurring, any eviction that the sheriff's involved in that is occurring, regardless of whether it's only tenants? Can it cover, for example, foreclosures on homeowners? Or, I mean, we've recently had an example of what can happen when the city is not aware. So is that something that you can add to your roster of things to include, even though this is landlord-tenant, it's having to do with how eviction notifications are received by the city?
I think looking at the spectrum is important here, especially when it's something like so personal as evictions. We primarily looked at rental properties, but can explore further what it would look like for homeowners. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Thank you for that. And Councilmember Lamon, I had a similar question. I think part of it too is not necessarily like when it comes to homeowner foreclosure related evictions, it's not necessarily a landlord per se that has to tell us. It is that individual or the sheriff's office, right?
That's what I meant. Yeah.
And so, this may be something that we have to figure out some way to get the sheriff's office to make us aware of those cases, which is a little different. We have some leverage with the landlords because we have these nice things called licenses that people want. The sheriff's office, I don't know, maybe not so much, but I think it's definitely worth trying to see if we can work with the county and others to force notification around those types of evictions.
Mayor?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I wasn't sure if you could see my hand.
Yeah.
Can I just follow up? I'm not sure if I'm totally clear on the LIHTC question, and I would like to do it in front of the whole council so that we're all clear. So, for example, I mean, do we have any way to enforce as the city? Since I guess it is my understanding that we are not giving out licenses for the LIHTC buildings. Is that, and I'm sorry, that's a very naive question, but am I wrong about that?
So we still, and I want to be clear on your question as well, are in communication with those property owners and do work closely
Right.
with them.
Right. No, I'm keenly aware of that close communication, but in fact, it is the enforcement of anything that we would expect of them that I find most maddening as a council member, that I feel powerless often because we don't directly have any teeth. So if any of these really fantastic new codified regulations were to come into place, I'm wondering if we have anything besides the licensing that we don't have on these buildings that would give us some power or enforcement capacity.
Yes. So all rental properties, regardless of their status as a subsidized building exempt from rent stabilization or a regular typical market rate unit, is licensed. And all of them are still bound to follow city law in regards to kind of our landlord-tenant obligations. And so this would include kind of, in some cases, bringing cases to COLTA. So there was a COLTA case, and I'm forgetting the exact dates, where a tenant at a subsidized property brought a COLTA case, filed a complaint regarding a kind of maintenance issue that led to the destruction of some of her property. It was settled, and I'll do a quick shout out to our incredible housing specialist, Jean Kerr, who has been with the city for many years and is very good at bringing together landlords and tenants and finding solutions. And so in this case, a payout was made to the tenant based on the damages done to her personal property. So there are still ways for us to get compliance. We can also issue citations. That is trickier, but we occasionally have done that, particularly in cases where we're seeing repeat behavior at a property.
Okay, so we do renew those licenses, Mr. McNally, for a LIHTC building in the same way that we would renew a license for a directly rent stabilized property. Or is it really they're renewing their license through the county? I'm sorry, I just need clarity on that, because it has been my experience in these 4 years that I don't really have anything that I'm holding besides the conversation that we have that we can use to hold them accountable.
Yeah, so as part of this, they are licensed by the city. So they come to us to get licensed. They don't go to the county. In terms of license renewals, we have the ability to hold up a license under a few different conditions. One would be the fact that they haven't completed an inspection, and by completed an inspection, that isn't to say that we went through and documented all the issues. It's we've gone through with DHCA, we have documented all the issues, and then we have verified that they have been addressed. And so in some cases, some of them do have licenses that do lapse, and they are not allowed to. Part of the problem is why they hurry up is they would not be able to move forward any evictions in court if they have a lapsed license. And one of the reasons why we brought forward those license code changes last year was to better align inspections with that, because what was happening is we were doing inspections before the expiration date, and the result is that they were kind of skating by and getting extra months when they should be doing proactive maintenance. So that was a big part of it. The other piece would be that they have no open citations. We typically try to address issues before we issue citations, because bringing those to court is a time-consuming and costly process. And our goal is to get compliance with the code, and that's really what a citation is supposed to do. And so in most cases, a building, unless they have significant concerns, does not have open citations usually.
Okay, thank you. That is much more clear now. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember DeBala.
Yeah, thanks. Some of my questions were similar to Councilmember Hozak's questions, so we'll skip those. I'm glad to hear that most of this is going to be covering all the rental buildings and not just the ones that are subject to rent control. I'm particularly interested in the relocation assistance and the condo conversion agreements. And I understand that you said they're based on a county system. So can we have, can I have, and maybe everybody, some more information about the county condo conversion relocation agreements? So we can see a little bit more about what that looks like in practice now, and then maybe just a little bit of a sense of what you're going to do differently here, because if you were just going to adopt that, you would say that. But, and on the relocation, the expanded relocation assistance, temporary assistance, again, a little more information about what the county has now, and how what we're going to propose here is different. And third, the same thing with troubled properties, so we can understand. So if you can't do that matrix that Councilor Kondak was asking for, maybe we can pick off those three things and have a little more information about them, and then in our own heads we can compare. Yeah, so that was my questions, and I think these are great, and I would love to do them. Thank you. Thank you for the work.
Thank you, Councilmember Hanzak. Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you. Briefly, in slide 7, the image shows the Maryland Tenants Bill of Rights, and the proposal is to require that the tenant receives the city's Bill of Rights. Could you just explain the distinction between those two and whether typically both of those would be provided?
So we're looking to include the Maryland Bill of Rights as well, primarily in this particular recommendation.
Okay, all right. And there is a city Bill of Rights as well?
Tenant, landlord, it's evading me, handbook.
Handbook,
Yes.
okay, all right. I must have misread the language there. Oh, got it, okay. Second was regarding number 5, the forms of payment. Just from my experience, primarily with residents at Victory Tower, for the paper forms of payment, some residents have asked that both checks and cashier's checks be allowed. And related to that always a paper receipt be provided, because with paper checks, there can be a delay in the depositing, and then sometimes the word gets back to them, you haven't paid, and it's on them as to whether they kept a copy of the check. So having 2 types of paper allowed and making sure that the language requires a receipt as soon as possible, if it's put in a secure box, say. And I don't know where we are in terms of whether it would be possible to require one form of electronic payment being made, even if it was something like Venmo, because with mobility issues, seniors have said that simply getting down to the bank and back can be a real challenge. And when they had their system down for a long time, they found it very hard to get their rent paid each month for the people with mobility issues. Just a comment. And the last thing was, I was just wondering, do you plan to roll up these changes with any other code changes that might come out of the rent stabilization review, given the timing?
I don't foresee that, no.
Okay. Are there any of these that might beneficially be put on hold a bit pending what RSG finds out in their data collection and public input? Okay, all right, thank you.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. There's a couple of things that are here that I have been watching for a while, specifically the troubled properties. Poor Director McNally is probably tired of me sending a message saying, why don't we have Tacoma Park properties on the troubled properties list? And what do I need to do to make sure that we can get those data so that it is helpful for us to be able to better understand which properties within the city have an inordinate number of citations that could ultimately help us with protecting people who either live in them or may be considering, so that we have a little bit more teeth, as Councilmember Honzak raised, to push back, especially in those properties that we know have a lot of challenges. The tenant payment methods, and maybe this is a question that I could just follow up with you all about. So are we hearing anything in terms of HUD voucher renewals for folks and adding new electronic requirements? Because I'm just hearing that there's quite a few buildings now that are starting to roll out these electronic payment systems. And I don't know if it's people are conflating because it's when they're going through the process of renewing for their recertifications, and there are these changes with these new electronic payment approaches. Is there any connection between those, or is it just different buildings are onboarding these new electronic payment structures? Because I know that there's been a number of residents that were raising concerns here. And but I've been hearing some stuff in some other states where they're, particularly in senior buildings, where they're trying to onboard folks onto these electronic systems. Is this just a regular, just trying to offer people more electronic access to paying their bills and not necessarily connected in any way to recertification or some movement to, okay. I'm just starting to notice that quite a bit, and I've actually gotten a couple of calls about that transition to paying online. And I think one of the things that we probably do need to think about as we learn more about the payment structures that our multifamily buildings are adopting, we may want to partner with folks like the Village of Tacoma, because there's a number of seniors that are really, really nervous in terms of how and when and if it's appropriate to make their payments online when they don't feel comfortable doing that. And so just making sure that we're thinking through, if buildings are coming on board saying they're only electronic, that we have either some educational resources for older adults in the city, or we are also working to make sure that landlords are aware that they may need to have drop boxes or something like that, just to make sure people are okay. The other component, I definitely appreciate the emergency contact line. That is something that I know, as many of us have been on site to buildings and standing there for hours. Having these emergency contact numbers are really important. And then there's one other, just trying to make sure there isn't one other thing that I'm missing. One item is a little bit logistical, and it's perfectly fine to say we don't know just yet, Mayor. We'll figure it out. But we're talking. The next step is implying an ordinance, and while I recognize that there's some recommendations that are here that would require modifications to the code, there's some other pieces that I'm not exactly sure if to implement the recommendation would require a code change. And instead could be something more like administrative regs or some other aspect of how we're managing things. So it just would be helpful, like as we're kind of working through, and as you all are thinking through next steps for these recommendations, that we're also thinking about logistically in terms of how some of these may need to be implemented that would be different from others. Councilmember Landon.
I think that the folks working on the legislative team spoke with you about the pending legislation that our delegate Charkoudian had introduced that we just testified in support of, which would call for, if individual meters are placed in people's apartments, that they would then, basically have some protections against being overcharged or told that that was a source of, and especially to not allow it to be a basis for a rent not being paid and then relating to a potential eviction. And so I don't know the prospects of that legislation in the legislature, but the timing is such that by the time you get around to finalizing this, the legislative session will be over. And I just wanted to flag that it feels as if it's an appropriate element to consider including in this package if it indeed does become law, and even if it doesn't become state law, it's potentially something that we could address if we have a problem. And I guess this is my roundabout way of saying to be, keep your eyes open for it if it becomes mandatory, but even if it doesn't, I'd be interested in whether you have had that particular problem that she was trying to address with the legislation be an issue for our large-scale tenants in Tacoma Park that might not have separate metering, or might be, it sounded from her legislation as if people are playing a lot of fast and loose games with charging people for water, overcharging them, not being clear with them as to what their obligations are. So I wonder about both of those things.
Yeah, so with that one, we're excited to see the state stepping up. We haven't seen that as much in the city. Mostly, there's a few different reasons. We have older buildings that are not separately metered, and then there's a whole process that kind of is related to rent stabilization about how utilities are essentially, if you want to move them over to the tenant, you have to go through a process to allow that to occur. So it is a little bit of a different landscape within the city. So we haven't heard as much of that issue, but I do understand that it is a larger issue across the state.
Thank you. Councilmember DeBala.
Just very quickly, the same goes for electric utility meters, if that's an issue in the city.
So
Overcharging, et cetera.
yeah, we do see a problem that I think faces many, which is the cost of electricity is very high, and particularly we have older buildings who are not maybe insulated in the same way that modern buildings are, and so generate higher heating bills. And so part of what we hope to do with the multifamily building improvement program is really get in and try to get systems that are better, or even, looking when they do their energy assessments, hey, is insulation the best way to reduce your carbon footprint, but then also a good use for the tenants. So ideally generating those win-win situations.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Again, super excited and look forward to future conversations in the spring about your recommendations for additional tenant protections. Next,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have the potential funding for the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center redevelopment discussion.
Yeah, I'll just begin with a quick introduction to this item. Want to say that we appreciate council's patience as we've taken a little bit of time to investigate some things and work through some ideas on the staff side. I hope that this presentation will reflect that we have given a lot of thought. We try to bring multiple potential options to the mayor and council for an item that we know is very, very important to you, as clearly continues to be year after year a major council goal and priority. So we, as a staff, care quite a bit about this potential project, and we've worked also very closely with Mr. Greg Clark, our Recreation Director, who is available online this evening to participate in this conversation. So at this point, my pleasure to turn it over to Mr. McNally, who would like to walk us through a brief presentation, and we look forward to the conversation and the questions to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeSpirito. All right, my name is Devin McNally. I'm with the Housing and Community Development Department, and we're here with a Recreation Center redevelopment update. So the goal tonight is to provide a little bit of background, since I think this is the first time this council is hearing about this project, and then go discuss a few different options and the next steps that we're hoping to take in the coming months. So this project dates back really to 2011 and 2012, when there was the New Hampshire Corridor Plan that talked about a renewed rec center, and included us acquiring the property from the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, and then a community engagement process to understand the rec center requirements, and then continuing through an RFP that was done in 2022 going into 2023. And then work continuing after that process, which included assessment of the current facility and an appraisal. So the 2022 RFP did not have a kind of clear respondent that the city felt we could move forward with. And so in kind of the aftermath of this, what we did was we went out and engaged a firm to conduct a capital needs assessment of the current building, as well as an appraisal of the site. These are two things that we were able to do through a grant that we had with the state. And so while we had the dollars, the idea is let's do kind of some background work. During this time, we've also evaluated some properties that have come up on the market. This includes two of them that I listed right there, which is 117 Elm, also known as the Nevins School, and then 6501 Poplar, which is the Washington McLaughlin property. Both of these were just not seen as good fits. There are some site-specific constraints in both of these, and then there are significant price requirements if we were to acquire such a property. We also went back and spoke with county staff. It is the Tacoma Langley sector plan that governs this property, and then there are zoning requirements. So we wanted to make sure that we really understood kind of the requirements of the site. In particular, we do know that as part of getting the land from the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, that there were agreements made between the city and the commission about kind of use of the site. So we wanted to make sure we vetted any ideas by them. So a little bit about this capital needs appraisal. Essentially, over the next 10 years, there's about $500,000 in improvements that need to be done. Most of the building systems are in good shape, but there is some interior work that could be done. If you have visited and been on the inside, you can attest to that. But the idea is that this would be kind of to keep the building running as it currently is. If we were to build a new recreation center, we are estimating the cost at between $17 and $20 million. This is based on kind of the responses we received in the 2022 RFP, and then adjusting for increases in materials and labor costs. Unfortunately, there's not really a good way to defray most of these costs. There are some small dollar grant programs that the city could look at, but most of this would have to be borne by the city in some way, shape, or form. So there are kind of four options that we've kind of landed on, and I will run through each of them, but this is just a quick table with all of them. but I'll start with kind of the status quo option, which is essentially extending the existing facility's life through kind of the minimum repairs outlined in the facility needs assessment. This would cost somewhere between $500,000 to $1.1 million if we were to say run into any particular issues, or let's say one of our building systems unfortunately did not make it to its typical warranty end year date. This would be the least disruptive and the lowest cost option, and would certainly limit the cost to the city. It is a dated building, and it doesn't have kind of the existing recreational facilities that we would hope to have to support our recreation department. And it still, at the end of the day, would need to be replaced at some point in time. So what we'd be doing is essentially moving kind of kicking the can down the road, so to speak. The second option is a substantial renovation of the existing structure. So thinking through, this would be essentially a full gut out of the current structure, potentially seeing where we could add on. The reason why this cost is unknown is to get a good sense of the cost, we would have to do some preliminary kind of feasibility work, which includes taking a hard look at the building with some architects and engineers and seeing kind of what is possible with that site and, you know, what could the structure accommodate for. It potentially could provide a lower cost than a full new construction, and we would retain control of that parcel. If you have been to the site, it is a very small piece of land that we're working with. It's less than 2 acres, and directly to the south is a forest conservation easement that we cannot encroach upon. So we are playing in a very limited space, and that means that this cost could vary widely, because it's likely that if we were to do any sort of renovation, the only place we could go is up, and that could potentially mean a lot more cost in that. Additionally, depending on the state of the structure itself, it could simply just be the same as it might not be viable to do a renovation at all. The third option is the demolition of the current structure and a new construction on that site. So we said about $17 to $20 million. I will say this is an estimate, as borrowing rates vary almost daily, but to keep in your mind, that's somewhere between $1 and $1.2 million a year in annual debt service, depending on the length of time of the debt and the interest rate. The pros are we would get a brand new recreation center, and it would give us the greatest control over the project design, construction, and timeline. There are a number of concerns that staff would have about this option. This would be the highest cost project at the moment, and it would essentially give us debt service far beyond what we staff believe is financially healthy for the city. And so at this moment, we're not recommending this option. Option 4 is a RFP, but with slightly different parameters than what we did in the 2022 solicitation. So we would focus on proposals that provide a new recreation center and new housing in exchange for the land and a long-term lease contract. When we released the 2022 RFP, it was very much a let's see what ideas people can come up with, and I will commend a lot of the respondents. They were very creative. Unfortunately, all of them included essentially we need the city to provide some significant capital up front. The idea with this RFP would be that we would be deeding the land, and that would be our upfront contribution to the project, and that we would be open to some sort of negotiation on a lease payment for a set lease term. And so that's why the cost says a land value plus annual lease payment. A lot of that would be up to the negotiation between a private developer and the city. So the pros would be that we could potentially get a new recreation center at a lower cost to the city. We would also, as a result, potentially bring the land back onto the city's tax roll and potentially have some of the maintenance covered through a development. It also could provide additional housing, senior or other affordable housing, to the city as well. This has the potential of not getting a response that is doable for the city, and it would require that we relinquish the rights to the parcel, which means that future renovations would require negotiation with the new landowner that we meet with. So all of those options, that was a lot that I just presented. What we are asking or what we are recommending as next steps, we have $160,000 in allocated funds. We've used a small chunk of that for some initial studies to conduct a feasibility study and initial concept for a renovation. We want to make sure we understand those costs and feasibilities. And then follow that up with an RFP outlined in option 4 for later in 2026. The idea here is then we would have all the information we would possibly have to be able to select and distinguish between firms that respond to the RFP and be able to present council with the most amount of information for council to evaluate their options. So this, below that is just kind of some general next steps. We imagine that most of the spring into the summer would be the feasibility analysis, bringing that back in the fall for an update and to talk about an RFP, and then releasing that RFP later in 2026. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I have a couple of quick questions. So in terms of option 4, and I guess this is me trying to think probably when I'm in a wheelchair. In terms of the, sorry, so I'm just going to be realistic. So in terms of what is in essence, and correct me if I'm wrong in terms of what you're proposing, it's a bit of a lease back, right? Like we give them the land, they develop, they give us a rec center, we lease it back, right?
Correct.
And I know that you all would be working through the logistics, but how long would that lease back be? Or how long are these kind of lease back agreements typically?
I've seen leaseback arrangements for other types of municipal facilities and recreation facilities around the country. This is a technique that is used. Typically, it's the useful life of the building. It can be 50 years. And that's really where the savings, the affordability to a community can come in. If we're doing standard debt service on standard bonds, it might be over a period of 20, 25 years. Payments are much, much higher. If you're spreading this over 50 years, in essence, a lease back becomes an annual payment, just like a debt service on a bond is an annual payment. This would be a more manageable, lower price because it's over twice the period of time. And ultimately, you have, you run it through the useful life of the building. Typically, there's a opportunity to re-up, extend, or renegotiate if the building after 50 years needs to be replaced and it's both partners are willing. It could be a renovation or a reconstruction, but it's to basically try to buy about 50 years worth of use of a new recreation center. In this case, the value is it's coupled with housing, so it would be kind of a mixed use type of developer, not just strictly a housing developer. We want to try to attract those developers that do mixed use work instead of commercial like office or retail on the ground floor, this would be a rec center. And couple that with housing, this is in the CRT zone. So I think upwards of, could you give some sense of hypothetically how many stories or the height of the building, and maybe some sense of how much housing that might be involved?
Yeah, and we can get the full details. The previous ones were 100+ units. A lot of them were utilizing density bonuses, given that they were going to be affordable housing developments. So you can get some mass on that site. As with everything, it depends on their mixture of units.
Sure. And to a developer, the rec center can be an amenity to attract tenants and retain tenants in the housing. That often is a strong feature. It's port authorities, developers, other entities have engaged in capital leaseback types of development.
And so is the idea, because we've done this twice, right? We did this in 2017, we did this in 2022, right? Where we put out this notion. Are you all, and what we got back, quite frankly, was often deprioritization of the rec center component and prioritization of the housing component, because the space is so small, there are trade-offs. And so other than, like, is the idea that we may get something different because now we're offering up the land? Or I guess what I'm trying to just make sure that we're not doing is keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and not recognizing the site limitations, and ultimately have folks putting in on an RFP, and then we see a rec center that's the size of a postage stamp, or they're not willing to invest in what they would need to, such as underground parking, to make sure that all of the people in the 100 units that's above, in addition to residents that may come for the rec center participation, like could park. So what are the thoughts that staff have, particularly, if we're going down this path of like another RFP, or is the idea that once you do this study, right, and you may learn some things, you may pivot? I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding how we're not repeating, but learning from and building upon prior work that was done to move the rec center forward.
Yeah, I see it as a more focused RFP than what was done before, and that's no criticism of what was done before. I think it's a recognition we would be seeking a lease-back arrangement. The last one didn't ask for that. Likewise, we would have our minimum requirements for a rec center, so what they propose would need to meet our standard that we're advertising for. I think my own view is if it can be clearly advertised, among others, to those mixed-use developers, not just those that are used to building housing. If you just build housing, yeah, you're not really going to know how to fit recreation in there. You're not going to really want to necessarily fit recreation in there. But developers that do commercial and office on ground floor know how to do things other than housing. And I think a real focused approach with this capital leaseback mechanism clearly in mind, hey, this is what we have in mind over the span of, say, 50 years, let's say, ultimately to be negotiated. It'd have to be a little leeway. But nevertheless, over a long period of time, like 50 years, the idea was that they could amortize their cost and any debt that they might have incurred in conducting the project. We would also try, as we mentioned in the staff report, try to explore whether there's other ways to help bring down the total cost for, ultimately the project, and that would be to see if we could get any partnership with, in the terms of grants, in terms of conceivably with other nonprofit or even other governmental organizations that could contribute to the pot, so that the cost that has to be amortized would be relatively smaller in that case.
And I'm sorry, this is my last, well, it's not my last question, I got a lot of questions, but this will be my last one, and I'll turn to somebody else. Do we know what the appraised value is for the land?
We have that number, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but we can get it to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful for me to understand, like, what is the value of the land that we have versus, and so what you're giving up, right? If what you're giving up is an asset that's worth 22 mil, right? And, trying to make sure that we're not, just trying to think through,
Oh,
for
yeah.
me, strategically, the math, right?
Yep, yep. That's
And then-
key information for council to have. We, clearly as a potential real estate negotiation, we'll want to be careful in sharing
Exact
what
numbers, yeah.
that real estate
Yeah.
determination was, but we can share it with council.
Excellent, thank you. Councilmember Westlake.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation, all the work I know you all have been putting in behind the scenes for a long time on this. I also have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to start by piggybacking on what Mayor Searcy was just talking about and what City Manager Despirito, what you were just describing. When you're talking about with the lease back, it trying to appeal to mixed-use developers, are you saying it's always housing on top? Like, so other developers that usually do retail with housing on top, and we would be trying to say rec center on the bottom, housing on the top?
Correct.
Okay, because I was trying to, and then is housing the only option?
Office could be, but the market for office is not great.
Yeah.
Other commercial, again, not really a strong market right now. Deb?
Okay.
Part of it also is the Tacoma Langley sector plan specifically calls out this parcel as, and specifically talks about the redevelopment of the rec center as a mixed use, rec on the bottom, housing above. And so to do that would require us to go back to the planning commission and basically say, we know that you made this recommendation, we know you adopted this plan, we would like you to unwind it. It's not to say that it couldn't be done. It creates a whole nother level of complexity, though, because then you're asking them to essentially put aside their plan.
Yeah, and we're excited too about the potential for additional housing. I think additional housing stock, some component of which we would like to require to be in the affordable range, would increase our net stock of affordable housing as well in the community, where we really haven't had any appreciable new housing development in many years.
Yeah. Okay, and I have a question about one of the other options, and then I'll pass it along. The first one with the status quo, and I see that, well, it's slide 8, page 8, that one of the cons is that the last cons is that it does not meet current council priorities. I can imagine what that means, but could you elaborate so that folks can so we all can be on the same page about what that would mean?
And perhaps even Greg could weigh in on that as well.
Yeah.
Greg, would you like to comment on that question? Were you able to hear it?
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, one of the council priorities, the previous council priorities was to provide responsive programs to the community. And the building is in such, I want to say it's an older building, and it doesn't allow you to have sort of modern things in it. For instance, you have to walk through one classroom to get to the other. So it makes it difficult for you to have certain programs and dual programs in the building just because of the shape. The weight room doesn't have ventilation. I mean, it does not meet some of the requirements of programs that we need to be able to present to the community.
Yeah, I think the vision, as I've read it, of the mayor and council for a new generation recreation center exceeds some of the capabilities of the existing structure. So to that end, that vision, I don't think would align with just minimal repairs. I think that's what we meant. Ultimately, that would be all of your decision, whether it does or does not. But our perception is that perhaps it would not.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say, you know, of course, council and what we want matters, but we also engage the community extensively to know what the community wants. And so I think it's important for us to also make sure that we're being mindful of the community feedback that we received as well around the types of services they would like to see. Councilmember DeBala.
Well, that was one of my questions, which we don't have to answer tonight, but which clearly ought to be part of the consideration, is what the results of the Brick and Story work were with the community that lives near the rec center, and maybe getting that around to the current council, because most of us weren't around at that point. I was, but most of you weren't, and just making sure that people know what that is, what the results were of all of that engagement. I appreciate the creativity and the persistence of the staff to keep coming back on this. I have supported a new rec center for years, and I'm at the point where option 2 is starting to look real good to me, because I don't want to be in a wheelchair before we get a new rec center. Quite seriously, what I mean by that is we have needs now for programming that, and the staff has built a great demand for programs and activities and sports in that facility, and it's the only thing now that the library has moved back. It's the only thing over there for half of our city. So I do feel a little bit of time crunch in the terms of getting something more functional than what we have now. And so I had a lot of questions about option 4, but I also have some questions which have been answered. But I also have a couple of questions about option, I think it's option 2, the renovation option. So I note in the facility condition assessment that it says it right up front, that the expected life of the structure that's there now is another 40 years. So, I mean, barring an act of God. I think they literally say barring a natural disaster. So if that is true or close enough for further investigation, then I think it would make some sense to look at how much we can push that building that's there now. Can we go up and have 2 classrooms on top? Can we go back and figure out some other solution on parking? Is there some way to do something about the weight room other than change the HVAC, which would be a really good thing to do? And there's something in here about, from 2024, about saving for renovations, and I don't know if we did that. I don't think that we did. So I'm wondering if in this current budget proposal, we can have the money, the 33,000 for immediate and short-term repairs. Well, that doesn't sound too hard. And then some part of the, whether we can consider some part of the 500,000 for the more what's the term that they use? Not the immediate and short-term repairs, but the necessary repairs that take a little longer.
We do have the facility maintenance reserve that
We
we
do
can
have
apply
it,
to
some of it,
immediate
okay.
short-term
Right.
needs. And there have been, and council has supported, there've been some elements.
Yeah, where there was the roof and there was the
yeah.
leak in there, yeah.
And
it-
what was it, the separation in the gym, and there've been a number of things. For short-term, relatively lower cost. As far as do we propose to budget, Well, partly that's the value of this conversation at this stage, is to get some general sense of where council might want to go. In some, with some of these options, setting aside money even in this next budget, X amount might make some sense, or depending on other options, it might not.
Yeah,
So we'll ultimately, that
Mike-
for staff right now isn't a truly answerable question until ultimately council wants to give a little more sense of
Yeah.
which direction you want to
Yeah,
pursue.
so I'm letting you know where I'm landing right now. Because I'm not, I share the vision of apartments above, rec center below, and I've been through the 2 rounds, and I'm thinking it's time to consider something else. So my questions about option 2 had to do with the facility study, and which is very thorough. I only saw the summary, and then I finally saw the full report, and there's a lot to work with here in terms of what the potential could be. And I forget what you said about how much it would cost to do some kind of evaluation of a renovation. Evaluation's not the right word, is it?
Yeah.
Feasibility study.
Yeah, and we imagine that it'll be a not insignificant cost, but we do think that it would certainly be covered by the 160
Yeah, because we have the 160,000
currently
tucked away.
allocated for recreation center redevelopment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the tricky thing with the renovation and why we don't have a lot of answers on it is, as kind of noted, it's a tricky site. So anything building, kind of, if we're working within the existing structure, that'll be something that we have to essentially live with, and then we have to work around it. And then there's the question of, yes, the building itself could probably last another 40 years, but would it require essentially strengthening to kind of go up? Because it was never designed to have multiple
Right.
stories above it. And then if we're doing that, where do we put the parking? There are ADA requirements that would kick in that we would want to be very mindful of. So that's partially why, one of the next steps is we would have to bring in some architects and engineers to answer those questions, to give council a better sense of what would that entail if we were trying to renovate, use what we have, maybe add on. Is that feasible? And if so, what would be that cost?
And my last, thank you. And my last question has to do just with option 1, if you said it, I missed it. The cost for the status quo, 500,000, that came from the facility condition assessment to $1.1 million. Where did we get the $1.1 million?
Yeah, some of that is, so the $500,000 is in today's value. And so some of that is inflation, and then there's additions for if a major building system were to fail within the next 10 years, what will we have to go in and
Okay, so
fix
that's a
it?
10-year horizon. Okay, thank you. I don't mean to take everybody else's time up. I appreciate the work.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. I'm trying to see if Councilmember Hanzak is before Councilmember Landman, and I feel like your hand has been up. Was yours up longer? I have no idea. Okay, all right. Councilmember Landman, and then Councilmember Hanzak, and then Councilmember Schlegel. I have to turn my head a lot between this and that and try to figure out who got what when.
I first of all want to thank you for the I want to thank you for the thoroughness of what you've presented and the detail in which you are looking at creativity in ways to make this happen. I'll start with my small question, which is, if recognizing that whatever option we choose, it's going to take at least 1 or 2 seasons of Greg Clark's excellent solicitation of participants in our rec program. Do you have a sort of the next, let's say, 18 months worth of modest improvements you can make to the daily quality of life for the staff there to keep operating. I'm not talking about everything that's on this list, but there are some things that are identified that aren't that costly, but I'm hoping that we don't have to wait to do anything until decisions are made. So can I assume that those improve, kind of on the scale of what we're looking at for the police department's quality of life in their home? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we've done some improvements every year
Yeah,
from the
okay.
facility maintenance reserve. Greg, do you want to speak to some of the things that have been done in recent years and
We don't
or
need to do
planning?
that.
Okay.
I don't want to
We
take
would have
time
that
with
information if
Okay.
council would like it.
But I just want to make sure that we're not putting everything on hold while
No.
we go through this process,
No.
because it isn't a facility people use every
No.
day. Okay, so my big question has to do with the big picture, which is I very much am interested in the option that you're exploring for number 4. I also know that we have the potential for potentially partnering with other people who have a lot more heft in the room in a negotiation than we might. I'm thinking about Montgomery County, and then the idea that you circulated or mentioned, City Manager DeSpirito, about a MoCo PG collaboration. Montgomery County has done a number of these options where they essentially lease back land that they give for I think they were charging $1 for their old parking lots and sites they no longer needed. And they have had some success with affordable housing construction. You wrote me an answer about this, but I think the answer might have had a typo in it or something, because I had a little trouble interpreting what, but if you could explain whether this is an option that you have seriously looked into, given the county's high priority for the construction of affordable housing and the fact that they've had a number of different successes in building large-scale affordable housing. Can we look at that as a possible way to and to strengthen our leverage in the negotiating room?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be I'm sorry.
Do you want me to start? Or?
Well, I just want to go to the partnership idea. That would be, as we mentioned, in discussing option 4, one of the potential partners. And I have personally had conversation with the Montgomery County Recreation Director in the past year about, and it just described, she was very familiar with our building and very familiar with what we desired to do, given its age. She did not see where they had the means to, at that time. Now, this was just in a renovation kind of concept.
But
If it's
in a-
paired with housing.
Yeah, that's
and
what I
a-
was,
yes,
that's not the
that's a
place I
different-
would have started,
But that
not
would
with the
be other
recreation.
people in the room from the county.
Yeah.
Than just the recreation director. And that's what we were suggesting, is that if council's got some notion that it's worth exploring, staff we could get very active in exploring the sort of combo idea with the county and see where that goes.
We did have that conversation also with the county, with HOC specifically, because they were the county developer behind the aquatic center. The furthest that got was essentially we said, hey, what would you think about this concept? And what they said kind of upfront was, well, yes, we did build it, but recreation put the money up for the aquatic center. We didn't, kind of subsidize them pretty much. So they were not saying a no, but they were saying you would need to pony up some money. We have not had any conversations with Prince George's County, though.
Right.
So in other words, the rec center, the aquatic center was built in a collaboration with HOC, but the rec center, part of it was not rolled into the deal. It was paid for by, that's exactly the kind of answer you got from the other developers. Yeah, we'd be happy to build a building, but you'd have to pay for
That
the
we're housing
aquatic center.
developers, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I hope it is something that you consider, because it does feel as though we don't have that experience in the construction of rec centers either, but housing, but our neighbors definitely do have that experience, and they would be able to strengthen our hand, I would imagine.
Yeah, we'd be happy to explore that if there's any interest in looking at the option number 4.
Right. And I do just want to, because again, history. There, very candidly, the county was not really interested, which is one of the reasons why we were able to get the land swap That's how we ended up with it, because the county didn't want the property. And so even when you were talking about the Tacoma Langley sector plan, which also upzoned the property, that thing has been in place since 2012, you know? So it is, I think that, not to discredit what we're talking about in terms of option 4, I'm just trying to be a realist in terms of all of the rocks that have been overturned over the last X number of years, and where we met resistance, where we had to try to sell some things. And so, and quite frankly, it's not the county, it's the state that we would have to sell, and the state would have to have the money. And quite frankly, when we had the state, then COVID hit. And, you know, so it's, I think it's one of those things where it is a little bit more tricky than we may believe on the surface, because everyone's dealing with tight budgets, and it would require us to try to figure out ways to bring different partners together, including external partners, that could perhaps pull those monies together to get a deal done. Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the staff for all the work that's gone into this. This is really tough. I guess I wanted to know about PG County. You answered that question for me. I've never heard anybody talk about what anyone even speculates would happen if we were to approach PG County on the recreation front, just given where this center is situated. So I'd be interested in that data point just behind the scenes, if anybody's got it later, even if we haven't talked to them, just kind of what do we know about that? Secondly, I guess I'm wanting to lean towards option 4, except pragmatically speaking, given the history, and given, frankly, what I feel like I'm seeing in our local economy, that is going to be the status quo for at least the next several years, unless some magical thing happens. I guess I'm not imagining that we're going to get a lot of bids that are going to meet the needs that we have and be economically viable, even with some of the slightly different aspects of option 4 than what we've seen before. And that's making me really depressed. But even though it's a really cool idea, I'm afraid the timing just might not be great right now for our local economy. I'm not convinced that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to build that kind of thing right now and ante up the money for the recreation center on a small, awkward piece of property. So I'm just wondering if our goal is to make this place better, bigger, faster, make it meet the needs, and also not get ourselves into a quagmire that could end up costing us really a lot more money than what we have on hand right now, in light of what we're facing over the next, 5 years. I know we're looking at a 10 to 50 year time horizon, but I'd love to see us fix this problem ASAP, and make things nicer. So, I mean, I'm kind of personally, I'm kind of leaning option 1 and do it right and do it great as much as we can, and explore the adding on spaces, knowing that might not be super viable on the site that we've got, but like maybe there could be if we're talking about something on the order of 1.1 million, that sounds really doable within the kind of budgets that our city has. And then what if we were thinking more creatively about other recreation spaces across the city that might be able to make recreation more accessible across the city? That's where this may not be a conversation we can have tonight because of our time limitations, Director Clark, but I'd be interested in just kind of hearing your thoughts on that. I know it feels a little bit like my thoughts originally on the library and whether we could have satellite libraries, but I know, for example, just for example, and I don't want to get people too crazy about this, like, oh God, Carrie, you're being too wild, but like at Essex House, you know, for the last 4 years, I've had some folks from, I think it's from Tacoma Foundation, who apparently surveyed all the hundreds of kids that live in that building and young people who are now already teenagers. And they said, what is the number one thing that you want to do? Well, they wanted some very simple exercise equipment outside of their building where they could walk outside and use it. And now they're like almost adults, right? And I'm like, why is that so hard, you know, to make happen? And it is actually, it's really hard. So I keep thinking, like, what if we had like a mobile truck, you know, that had exercise and equipment with Tacoma staff that moved, you know, to make it, you know, they could walk in, use the services, the little gym, and that could be a part of our recreation, rehabilitation, and building to expand our space and make ourselves, you know, as great as we want to be, knowing that right now we can't leverage, you know, I think this is going to cost more, like 20-30 million to do it right, you know, 30 looking at how much the library rehabilitation costs, 40 even maybe. So that concerns me, just because I don't know if anybody's going to put that kind of cash forward for us. Anyway, that's my crazy out of the box thinking right now. I'm sorry to be the Debbie Downer.
So one of the things that would be helpful for me, and thank you, Councilmember Honzak, based on the next steps that were described, is the idea to move forward with the study, right, that's being proposed. You don't necessarily need council vote on that. Like, we have the money for it, we've allocated the money for it. It's something we need to do regardless. And then from there, it would be put us in a better place where we have more information about our current asset and the potential there. And then from there, be able to determine amongst the approaches which would make the most sense for us to move forward. Because you would have complete information, and therefore we would have complete information as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Excellent. Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you. This is a great clarifying work session to have the opportunity to look at these options. And I remember following the rec center studies before and reading. I'm familiar with the Brick and Story study and the things that residents, particularly in the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, are interested in. So one of the thoughts I have is that it would be good for us to know, like, what is the footprint for a good rec center? You know, you mentioned this being a very small site. Is it in fact too small for what we would eventually want if we could get what we wanted? Or if we continue to pursue options at that site, is it boxing us in terms of meeting our long-term recreation center needs? That's a question. Getting a clear vision for the footprint could also help us know what other spaces to either keep an eye on or to negotiate for. So
the footprint was part of what was looked at previously. I don't know if Greg, you want to speak to that?
Correct. Greg, if you want to, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we looked at the footprint and we actually visited several sites, and it was determined that we would need around 17,000 square feet to adequately meet the needs of the community in some of the studies that we've done. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the current facility is around 10,000 square feet. Does that sound about right, Devin?
Yeah, I believe it's between 10 and 12,000 square feet.
And then, thank you. And in terms of, was that projecting any future population growth, given like rezoning and things of that nature?
Yeah, I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, and in terms of parking, I know that we've also talked about the adequacy of parking. So do we have any sense of what the ideal minimum on, I don't know whether you know, with square feet of a parking lot, but, you know, and there's different ways to do parking, but generally surface parking is a lot cheaper.
Yeah, I think the number that we've been putting into some of our stuff is about 50 spaces. I mean, with an option of kind of getting to that, let's call it ideal rec center, a lot of it'll depend on kind of one of the reasons why we're proposing the kind of feasibility study is it'll be looking at the space as it exists, what are the constraints there that we've kind of highlighted a little bit, but then what would you need to do in order to kind of meet the design requirements and then also work within that existing space. The good news is, as we've mentioned, the zoning does allow for going up. That's bad news is once you start going vertical, you're just increasing the cost exponentially.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's, isn't that a pain? So to other colleagues' comments about the county helping out, I do want to note, I know it's been noted before, the county has pitched in to pay for a new recreation center in Poolsville. And I'd probably have my facts wrong on that, but it's something that resident Therese Gibson has followed a lot, and she's emphasized that we're in a window of time where we have local residents as elected officials in county government,
So I will say, I've spoken to the mayor of Poolsville. The county is not, they are giving the county land in order for recreational services to be provided in that segment of the county. The only reason why the county is, and the check has not been granted, but the only reason why is because the county has little to no recreational services up county, and Poolsville has the land, and therefore the county is making the investment. So I would be extremely hesitant to assume that if we were to give back an aging facility that was given to us by the county, that they will somehow come in and tear it down and build us something brand new. I see the city manager.
Yeah, the folks that I talked to said that they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Was it the county or Park and Plan?
It was a park and planning facility, but it was handed over on the Montgomery County side.
Oh, I
So
meant Poolsville.
Poolsville, yeah, no, for Poolsville, my understanding was for Poolsville, it is the county, but it is in one, I don't want to belabor the point because I don't know all of the nuance, but my understanding is that agreement is strictly because the county does not have property up county and they recognize that there was a recreation gap.
Right.
Down county, it's not the same in that they have the aquatic center, they have some nearby other facilities. They don't necessarily identify an immediate gap for recreational services down county because they can give you a whole list of other recreational facilities that are around.
Yeah, the county just built a $65 million aquatics facility 1 air mile from here. So that was pointed out to me by the
Yeah.
county folks that I talked to.
Okay.
Their most recent investment was 1 mile away.
So colleagues, I look at the map a little differently. I erase the border between the counties, and I keep in mind that that was a Prince George's County MNC-PPC facility. And why was it there? Because it was needed geographically right there. And it still is. If you erase the county line and you look how far people on the Prince George's side need to go to a decent recreation center, it's a long way. There's Chillum Ridgecrest, which has some facilities in the splash pool. Most everything is outdoors. In terms of indoor recreation, you use the word gap, Manager DeSpirito, and yeah, it is a gap. And I feel that we should open up a sixth option of making a strong argument that MNC-PPC writ large, the bi-county organization, needs to fill this gap in recreation that exists for residents on both sides of that line.
Yeah, that's actually what we meant
Yeah.
when we were talking about finding partners, because PG
Yeah.
was absolutely one of the potential partners that we would want to talk to, because a lot of PG, as you correctly said, a lot of folks from PG may, they use our rec center now. Likely they would in the future as well.
Great. And I know that, Director Clark, I know you've probably been collecting those numbers and in ways that you can of whether they're Prince George's County residents or informally. So my thought would be, can we work with both the Prince George's and Montgomery County delegations perhaps to try to effect this cooperation between those two administrative branches of MNCPPC? We know they're not entirely separate, because if I take my kids to Wayne Curry Center, it's the same fee as I would pay in Montgomery County. And think about the synergy here, because we were just talking with Ralph Tellis last week about the value of prioritizing an interjurisdictional economic improvement district. So if we can get those talks going along those lines, like, this is economic development. Having a really nice rec center is one of the greatest things you can do in terms of economic development and spurring new housing and new mixed use. So I'll pause there on that and just ask if people have thoughts.
So one thing that I do want to make sure that we're using our political capital wisely, right? And we're not making assumptions that things don't exist because we're not familiar with them and we haven't visited them. On the Prince George's County side, they have the Langley Park Community Center, which is right on Merrimack. It's just on the opposite side of University Boulevard on Merrimack. That facility is an indoor facility. It has basketball courts. It's actually quite nice. They have a ceramics room. Been in there a few times for Purple Line meetings. Childcare programs, a computer lab, fitness equipment. They have like game rooms. So there is a facility on the other side of University from the rec center. I haven't looked at the map of it to see how close it is. Is it a mile or less? But it is a community center in the general area that is indoor and is equipped, that is on the Prince George's County side. So we need to make sure that if we are going to our partners, that it is from an informed place. They have a facility. So if they're going to invest, what is the difference between them beefing up the facilities that they already have, which is directly across University Boulevard, versus putting money towards a Montgomery County facility?
Okay,
And,
yeah.
it's not to slight or kill the idea, because there are resources that are needed. But I do know the Prince George's is trying to invest more in some of their open space on the other side of University Boulevard, so they can have walkable paths and connectivity to the future Purple Line stations that are there. So I just want to, it's not to kill the dream. And I think it is important for us to have these conversations with both counties around what the services are. I think the library filled a very unique gap that Prince George's County has. And that is because they do not have a full service library in the general vicinity. And so when we had that, the library location on New Hampshire Ave, we saw a lot of Prince George's kids because they don't have one. There was this idea during the development of the sector plan and what happened with that bus depot that's over there. And there was supposed to be like a little walk-in kind of library kind of thing. But no one wanted to do that. Like that area is not the best. So I could see why we had a lot of residents from Prince George's County that were taking advantage of the library. And I could even see why, because of the fantastic programming and the types of programming that we get through our rec department. We may see Prince George's kids trying to take advantage of that. But it's not necessarily because there is a lack of facilities in the immediate area.
Well, yeah, I think it's all a question of how you paint the picture. And if you look towards Chilham and Lewisdale and east by southeast, in the areas of Prince George's that are just north of Eastern Avenue for a mile and a half, 2 miles, you're not seeing that facility. And so those residents, they may not find it very attractive to have to go all the way over to Riggs or New Hampshire to get up to a rec center on the other side of University that's now going to also have a Purple Line running across it. And so it's just, I don't know what the demographic projections are, but why not have ourselves veto an idea? Why not try to make a case, try to make a pitch, is all I'm saying. Yeah.
And what I'm gonna say is, on the staff side, we're still kicking tires. So we're trying to gather as much information, and we can certainly start conversations with Prince George's County. We're not gonna turn anyone down prematurely. But yes, I think it's reasonable to be realistic about their counties. You know, they're looking across a wide geographic area, and so they're going to be by necessity very careful about where they put their resources.
I understand. And I don't want to take the mic for much longer, but I'm curious about the land swap idea, recognizing space and access constraints with the current site. So I recognize the constraints at the former school sites that you showed on Elm and Poplar. I just wanted to mention some other sites. The former Gusini's property has a huge empty parking lot in the rear. The Gusini's, it's just south of Ethan Allen on New Hampshire Avenue. It is across from Lidl, if that's familiar to you, on the Prince George's side.
I wasn't aware that was for sale.
I'm not saying these are for sale, but I'm saying you never know. All the way down, not the centrally located site, but the Advanced Auto Facility was purpose-built as a grocery store and has a high enough ceiling that it might even be like, fairly cheaply converted. And I know that Harvey Mizell sometimes has tried to put it up for sale.
These would be acquisitions.
Acquisitions or trades.
'Cause trading, those are much larger sites for less than 2 acres, so
I understand.
swap is probably not feasible
okay,
on those
swap
occasions.
with some cash involved. I don't know. There's also possible partnerships with, I'll just run through these. Possible partnerships with Don Bosco Cristo Rey School if they're looking for some other kind of athletic facility. I know the Tacoma Academy is outside of the city, but they're right outside, and so annexation would be a possibility. The hospital site, we don't know. It's great location. And then also keeping in mind there could be options for triple land swaps if there were ways to do that. For example, we have land near Public Works. What if somebody wanted to be able to do housing there, and in exchange for that, they helped us pay for something somewhere else? I'm just trying to think about what are all the cards we could play, and what are some possible large enough properties that could come into play on that side of town, or at least in the center.
Sure. And related to that would be a conversation by council about where in the city you would want the rec center. Because if swaps are being considered outside of Ward 6, that would be a departure from, and would, what else would be acceptable for exploration geographically? Staff is recognizing the need for recreation in the location where it is. It's a highly used rec center. So that's why we didn't propose alternate sites at this time, but ultimately it's up to council as to where the recreation will occur.
Thank you. We are at the end of this discussion, so no more lights. Councilmember DeBala?
Very quickly, I would appreciate it if, in addition to the Brick and Story results, the city staff could circulate a couple of examples of the leaseback. You mentioned them, rather than try to describe them now, but just, give us enough that we can do a little digging in.
I'm aware of them throughout my career. I don't have examples of like, here's a
okay.
deal,
I
here's a deal.
misunderstood you
But
then.
I will say, with respect, and I'm glad you mentioned it, with respect to option 4, we have had exploratory conversations with developers about this concept, exploratory. It ultimately would require a city prescribed procurement process, okay? but we've found some level of interest.
Okay,
You got to
that's good.
find a developer that doesn't normally do just housing.
All right, thank you. I missed that part. And then I was going to ask Councilmember Schlegel to write down what you just said so that I could absorb it, the list of different places that you think might be helpful, and send it around.
Sure, and I could just focus, I could make sure that the two that are in Ward 6 would be highlighted as such. Yeah.
Although Gosini's is pretty close to Ward 6, and it is on New Hampshire Avenue. But, yeah, at any rate, just would be helpful to have that, because that went kind of quick. That's it, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wesley.
Thank you. I just want to add as a final coda too that even being newer on the council, but knowing that past councils have worked on this and thought of a lot of ideas and staff has been thinking on it for a while, I look forward to this council voting to move something forward. I don't know which. There's still a lot to think about even with the 4 options that are given to us here. But I just truly hope that we as a council can make a decision and move forward so we can just start a plan and start something that residents could see.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilmember Westlake. And with that, we're going to move on to our last work session this evening. Thank you very much. I'm pretty sure members of council will be messaging you all and asking additional questions as we move forward with the next steps on this item. Last work session for this evening is proposed amendments to the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 14.12, noise. Who's going to take care of that one? Poor Devin. How did you get stuck with all of it?
Winning personality.
One trip to council. Yeah, we'll get this set up.
While they're setting up, I think this is a perfect opportunity. I know I mentioned it to some of you, but I would love to see him sitting doing these long presentations, and I'm not sure what the possibility of it, because you're making me tired seeing you standing up there. So I'd love to see us move forward, maybe having some tables set up for you guys, so you sit down.
Makes things, it's sometimes nice to stretch the legs, though. All right, I will try to make this as brief as possible so that we can get to questions. And I believe there might be an amendment that's proposed. So this is a kind of extension of the work session done in November of last year, where the noise board was dissolved, but there was an outstanding question of how do we handle nuisance noise complaints. So we have 2 options. We do have a recommendation on one of them to move forward with, and creating a new structure to kind of handle those. So I'll quickly talk about the current process. Essentially, noise is handled by 2 departments, the police department and HCD through our code enforcement division. During kind of standard operating hours, code enforcement is the individual that responds. They typically speak to both parties and conduct a decibel reading on the spot, and they encourage voluntary resolution, which resolves most cases, and it looks like there might be missing a bullet, but also additionally, if it is above the decibel reading found in code, we can issue a citation on the spot. Police respond to off-hour events and major disturbances. They will notify the household associated with that disturbance and request that the behavior cease, but they will cite if there are continued disturbances. They typically cite out of a different section of code than the noise code, but they do have the ability to cite the noise code if necessary. With multifamily properties, like the county, we don't investigate nuisance noise complaints within multifamily buildings. The primary bodies who handle that are property management in leased buildings and condominium associations in buildings that are owner occupied. We will notify landlords of recurring cases. Same with the police department. So let's say if there's a unit that is having, let's call it, nightly parties, they will likely get the owner of the building will get a notification, hey, we're getting a lot of calls regarding this unit. And police will respond to these multifamily properties through the non-emergency number. So there are two options, as I mentioned. The first is to remove the noise board and nuisance noise complaints. So we would go in and essentially remove any reference to nuisance noise, but we would retain the existing decibel-based standard. And what we mean by that is when we say a clear and objective standard, if two people were to stand there, hold the decimeter, and make a reading, they would both agree that the noise was above the decibel limit allowed. There would still be a continuation of the current rule. We would conduct a decibel reading, and we would attempt informal mediation even when readings do not exceed allowable limits. However, we would remove any sort of nuisance noise adjudication. This would not require any changes, and we would refer individuals to the Conflict Resolution Center in Montgomery County. Given kind of the work session and the kind of notice need for some sort of process to handle these nuisance noises, we are not recommending this option. The second option would create a staff adjudicated nuisance noise process. So what you see is just a mock-up of kind of what an online complaint form might look at. This would create a staff managed framework for nuisance noise complaints. What it would do is have a kind of intake complaint form in which both parties would kind of fill out their information. It would be reviewed by code enforcement, and then there would be a determination made by a code enforcement officer whether or not this was a nuisance noise, and that would be then followed up with. If it was determined to be a nuisance noise, we would indicate a notice of violation, potentially a citation if there are multiple cases or this isn't the first instance. If it was not determined, it would be notified to the complainants. We would encourage them to kind of reach out to the Conflict Resolution Center to see if resolution could be agreed to between those parties. And in all cases, code enforcement would be speaking with all parties involved and trying to see if they could potentially mediate. We have some great code enforcement staff here within the city, and a lot of times, a lot of the work they do is not necessarily just citing, but also speaking with people and kind of explaining and trying to see if there's a way to kind of address the situation without involving a citation. So the operational and fiscal impacts, we are not anticipating that there would be significant fiscal impacts. We believe that we could simply fold this into the existing work of the Code Enforcement Division. It's tough sometimes to estimate, but we're estimating between 70 and 200 hours per year, depending on the number of complaints and how long these cases take. We had about 20 cases this previous year, 10 the year before that, and 6 the year before that. So there is a wide range of cases that we could potentially receive. There is the potential for increased legal costs. If we cite, we have to go to court, and that means we have to work with the city attorney's office to go before a judge and essentially defend the citation. There is, the difficulty is always with nuisance noise. It's a little bit of a, nuanced term, and so that might generate some appeals and disputes regarding staff decisions. But once again, code enforcement staff work really hard to kind of work with the parties and kind of indicate to them and find ways to resolve without escalation. And so this second option is the one that we are recommending. We have a draft of an ordinance that kind of implements this second option that is part of your packet today. And so with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for moving forward with the staff component of this work. Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you. So speaking of the draft ordinance, before we get into the issues of the presentation, I would like to raise something that several of the council us on the council have talked about recently, and it's a quick technical fix to our noise code, actually in a section that we have in front of us, to address what is essentially an immigration issue. I sent a note around earlier today, but it was kind of late, so maybe you didn't see it. And so I will just briefly summarize that in the county, this concerns enforcement of a different part of the noise ordinance, the part that has to do with gas-powered leaf blowers. The connection is this, that the county council recently removed the option of residents taking photographs of violators as part of filing a complaint about gas-powered leaf blowers. The county did this because many of our local commercial yard workers are immigrants, and essentially, we're blessing taking photos of workers who may or may not be immigrants. And our city leaf blower ban is very similar to the county. I mean, literally almost word for word. It has the same provision in the same place, and that should be just as easy to remove it. And what I want to ask for tonight is not, do you want to do it? Do you want to consider it? If you want to consider it, we can come back is it next week? Whenever this comes up on up next, and have actual language for you so you can see what we're talking about. But just if you have the noise ordinance in front of you.
18th.
Pardon?
The 18th.
The 18th. So if you have the package in front of you today, you turn to page 8 of 12 in the actual code. You go to 1412-130. You go to C3, it's line 26 on page 8. And it lists the things an enforcement officer may issue a municipal infraction citation if the enforcement officer has any of these things. And number 3 is specifically about the leaf blowers. 1 and 2 and the new 4 are about everything, including the stuff we're talking about tonight. 3 is specifically about leaf blowers, and the second half of the first sentence, and a photograph of the alleged combustion engine-powered handheld backpack, et cetera, and a photograph. That's the key piece right there. So my question to everyone is not, do you want to talk about it now? But if you would like to consider this change, we can have it come back to us when we talk about this next. Because if we're changing the noise ordinance, then we're changing the noise ordinance. This is one more piece. It's an easy time to do it. Again, county's already done it.
Great. So are there
Questions,
any
comments?
questions about this, or can we move to a quick hand vote just so staff will have direction on making sure that we
May I
follow?
I have a question about it. The ordinance refers to taking a picture of the equipment, not the person holding it.
Yeah.
Perhaps to demonstrate what the particular piece of equipment, so that you can tell, is it gas-powered or is it not? And I definitely see the point of not taking pictures of individuals, but is there a way to frame it either for us and the county where it's only the equipment that the photograph
Apparently,
is
the
about?
county didn't choose to do it that way. They just
Okay.
knocked out the half a sentence.
Well,
and-
maybe just
and I
being
didn't
consistent is a
get-
good enough reason, but in terms of.
And when I talked to the city attorney about ways to do this, he didn't mention that, although, I mean, I guess it's an option.
Well, the only reason
So
I'm
we could
saying
look
it
at
is.
two options, yeah.
Is
Okay.
that, I mean, and maybe this is something to go back and ask the county about as well, because there's definitely a good reason to not take pictures of individuals. But if there's gonna be enforceability for this ordinance and somebody says, it's really loud, and I'm sure it's gas powered, well, the photograph of the actual device might answer a question that is critical to knowing if the complaint is valid or not, and it could specify of the equipment and not the individual, or something like that, but I just feel like this might be.
Keeping in mind that we are talking about residents like you and me that are just stepping out of their house for, okay.
Understood, but,
Yeah, I can ask.
I just,
Mhm.
for purposes of evidence, it seems like we are maybe throwing out the baby with the bathwater, if that's not
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wrong
well, the evidence
metaphor.
question is very real.
Yeah, thanks.
That's, okay, we could check that out.
Any other questions or points? Okay.
I have one, Mayor. I'd be interested to know if we have any details on, how something like that happened in the county and it adversely impacted an immigrant. Because as I'm thinking about it, if it's something like that would have happened here and we know that a photograph that would be taken will be provided to our local law enforcement, it does not work in coordination with ICE. So I wouldn't be so concerned about it here, but I would be interested to know what happened. That may influence my decision.
I'll check. What I know is about so far is that there wasn't a thing that happened that triggered this. It was a thought of, let's look for all the places in the county where we can make a small change that might help protect people. But I will check. Good question. Both of them.
Councilmember Schlegel?
Just briefly, I'm open to discussing it further. I do have concerns about the evidentiary requirement being removed, and then it would just be hearsay as to whether someone had been using a gas-powered blower. So I'm not sure how to resolve that, but maybe some further talk with the city attorney would justify putting this on the agenda.
Yeah, the county resolves it by having two people sign an affidavit, and I thought that that's what we had too. Well, I didn't say it was adequate, I was just answering the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so third question. All right, I got it.
So it sounds like, council members, we have a bye week on this particular topic before it comes back. It sounds like Councilmember DeBala is going to do a little bit of legwork with the county or staff or whomever you got to talk to.
Well, and then I would need the help of the
Work with
HCD
staff.
and, yeah, with staff and the city attorney.
To be able to give
Give a
full give everyone information, particularly if there will be a proposed amendment when we actually get ready to vote.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, everybody.
So are there any questions about the staff proposed approach to addressing noise? Councilmember Schlegel.
Yeah, thank you for simplifying this and helping us walk through it back in November and then coming back. Regarding the estimate of the process, and I know it's difficult because it varies from year to year, I just wanted to be clear. You said that, Director McNally, you said there were 20 cases in the last year or something. To my knowledge, none of those would have been nuisance noise complaints. Is that correct? They were other noise complaints where a decibel meter was involved?
So these were just noise complaints generally,
Okay.
that came to HCD. Most of these, quite frankly, were not above the decibel limit.
Okay.
In most cases, it usually is either kind of noise that had just occurred that had not been noticed, or in some cases I'll use an example. There was essentially a deer control device that emits a high frequency sound that usually humans can't hear, and someone was hearing it. And so generally speaking, our first step in the process usually is to go there and just kind of investigate the noise for ourselves, and then In some cases, we'll even knock on the door of the property just to ask the property member about, or the property owner about it, and start
Okay.
there.
Okay, yeah, I guess my question, thanks, that's helpful. I'm wondering whether the additional caseload of nuisance noise complaints is what you're estimating would take 70 to 200 hours more.
Yeah, a lot of it is, quite frankly, paperwork and just ensuring that we are generating a letter and kind of some of the more formalized process. A lot of how it's handled today is kind of more of an informal process where staff are going out. They might have the case logged in our kind of code enforcement case log, but they're not necessarily generating the formal letter, doing a determination in the same way that they would under this process. There's also if they're citing, then they have to plan for going to court, and that always takes a fair amount of time, writing out the citation, ensuring that it's properly delivered, in some cases engaging a process server to make sure that it gets to the point, and then going to court. We get a time window. This might be too much information. We get a 4-hour time window when our case might be heard, so we have to go up to Rockville, sit there, wait for our case to be called, and then testify, and then come back. So a much
Okay.
more formalized process will just have a little bit of extra time associated with it.
Thanks for that. I was a little bit taken aback by I was calculating 9 to 25 days of staff time potentially going into this. My other little question was, no, I guess I was only asking when you have recurrent or ongoing mechanical noise, would this review by code enforcement involve field observation? And you already answered that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Gilbert.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions and then maybe a comment, but just to clarify some things for me, can you provide the names of staff that was involved in the input into this ordinance?
Yeah, this would be myself, the chief of police, and the code enforcement manager, Dwayne Rick Baravecchia.
And did we have any data on how many calls for service that was ran to apartment buildings, multifamily properties during these same time periods?
I don't have that information, but we can work on getting that to you.
And some other questions, because there were some things that I didn't recognize in all of my years of law enforcement here, and even recently being a resident. I had a question as to what we're considering major when we discuss noise disturbances, because the city ordinance only uses the word excessive. So I'm wondering where we get that word from. How do we define major?
So what I'll say here is, in the cases of, if we're talking about something that's like a noise disturbance around like an off-hours event that police are responding to, they will, and I'll speak very briefly, and then we can have the chief follow up with probably a more detailed kind of version, but they'll triage it with all their calls that come in, and so assign an officer as appropriate. In some cases, they might, if there might not be the dispatch of an officer, there might just be a recording of that kind of, I'm here to complain, my neighbor is walking loudly upstairs. So there isn't necessarily a technical definition, but it is triaged by our dispatch.
Because it sounds like we're trying to separate something from excessive or a nuisance. And I'm concerned about that. But, okay, we can revisit that and what that means. And then there's in here it says police respond to off-hours events, major disruptions and major disturbances within family buildings. I know that they've been responding to for decades. Anytime calls for service for nuisance noise. in apartment dwellings. Is there something new that has happened in regards to our general orders or standard operating procedures that has changed? Because I know that police are, and it says further down here that they may not respond directly. And I'm wondering, why would they not? And when have they stopped?
So, to my knowledge, no general orders have changed around noise. I think it's similar. It's more about dispatch and kind of when the call comes in, what other calls are coming in at the same time. So I'll apologize if I spoke out of turn to say that they wouldn't respond. It's more just
Okay.
what officers are available.
Because that made me concerned. And I see that it said they would provide an incident number. And I know that that's not a general operating procedure of the police department that I worked for 27 years. Calls get held occasionally, but they're not held to the point where they're not responded to. And someone provided an incident number. And I'm wondering how that would help anyway if you give a complainant of a nuisance complaint an incident number, but you haven't confirmed that there's a noise. What is that incident number going to do for them?
Yeah, so this would be in cases of multifamily buildings. If, for example, there was a breach of lease case, the property owner, let's say that there is and we see this often actually with smoking violations, calls in for kind of to report can be used by the property owner to demonstrate that there is a pattern of behavior that is in violation of the lease. So that would be the point of the incident number. And my understanding, and I will profess that I am not an expert on how the police handle these calls in, but my understanding is that every kind of call into dispatch does have some sort of associated number with it. And so that would be kind of what we are referring to, which is that the property owner could call in, get that information of calls in to report that behavior, and could utilize that in a breach of lease case.
Okay. And they are very helpful. The event numbers are very helpful, but only if paired with the response that would help justify their complaint to management that they did file a complaint. And then the call for service could have some comments in it. My overall concern, and I'll share with my colleagues, is that we're going to have an issue with our racial equity component. And in the ordinance, it clearly states that you have nuisance noises that can be responded to by code enforcement in residential areas, but may not be responded to in multi-dwelling apartments. And I'm concerned that we're trying to legislate that out. And if our apartment leaseholders aren't given the same equitable response from the city for their nuisance complaint that people who live in residential areas do, then we're just not being fair racially. Because a lot of our people that live in these apartment buildings are people of color. And so I just want us to give that some thought.
Could I ask a clarifying question of what you think is the better result? Like, is the concern that the property owners who are currently responsible, the property managers, they are not a satisfactory mechanism for resolving the concerns of people who live in the apartments? They want to be able to bring in the same kind of response from the city? Is that the underlying
My concern,
problem?
yeah, there are two concerns there. One, so you have some management that they're not capable, they're not responsive, and not very helpful to the residents. And then two, in certain cases, they shouldn't be. In certain cases where these issues can become so contentious that they're dangerous, the police need to be involved and not management. Eventually, management can step in once police confirms that, hey, we have a problem apartment, we get several complaints, and And then that would give management their justification. But they don't have to step in. And oftentimes they don't want to step in. And I think we need to provide them that relief as well, if we can.
Just a point of order. Is it necessary that the agenda item have racial equity considerations statement on it? This one does not, that I can see.
Hold on.
While they're looking, I want to, can I ask a follow-up
Yeah.
question of Councilmember?
Is it there?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, it was one sheet was blue and the other was white, which
Oh,
threw me
the other
for a
one was
loop.
white.
Okay.
My apologies.
No
So
worries.
Councilmember Gilbert, so if but the police only respond during off hours, is the right answer to have the police be the ones who respond to concerning calls all the time in multifamily buildings? Would that be your recommendation?
That would be my recommendation. That's always been the case.
Yeah, and
It has never been the case that we haven't responded to noise complaints at any hour.
and what I should say is we're in this case we're not talking about changing any police operations or practices that they have always responded to. What I'm talking about here is what's called nuisance noise, and this is kind of noises that are going over property lines to other pieces. So the example I'll give is a commercial property installed essentially coolers that ran heavy fans, and that was going to nearby neighbors. And this was, it was under the decibel limit, but there was a case to be made that it was a nuisance noise. And so because we didn't have the noise control board, there wasn't necessarily a process we could send them through. And so this is about addressing those specific complaints. It does not, and I apologize if there was some lack of clarity, it does not change any other response to a noise disturbance that would be handled by the police.
Well, this does not describe the situation that you are describing, so I'm still unclear. I mean, I understand what you're saying, it's perfectly clear. The police get a call, they respond, but then it doesn't seem like the description here comports with the reality of how our police do respond. But maybe I am missing something here. And you're saying it's not changing, but this isn't what it is, according to how I understand what Councilmember Gilbert is saying. Right? Am I right about that?
And my concern was just what I'm reading here. And so I didn't see this spoken to in the ordinance, thank goodness. But I was concerned if that's the direction we're going when I saw that, again, the police don't respond, or they respond only on off hours, which I know isn't true, and that they may not respond and only provide a event number. So those are two things I definitely don't want to see going forward. I just wanted some clarification that that's not where we're going.
So the way police respond they have 24/7, kind of presence, so they will respond on off hours. So the intention of that slide, which is, I believe, slide 3, is to demonstrate that it is not, code enforcement works 9 to 5. So when 5 p.m. rolls around, my staff goes home. So they aren't there to respond to, let's say, a noise complaint of any kind. And so if one came in, whether it was at a multifamily building or a single family property or a commercial property, that has happened in the past where some people were at a commercial property being a little too loud, that is what the police would respond to. That was not to imply that police would not respond during the day if it was a disturbance. It is just to highlight that there is still coverage. And so I apologize if that is not made clear. The point here is to address cases in which HCD code enforcement is dealing with what is essentially, let's call it a nuisance noise going over property lines.
Thank you.
So on the
So Councilmember Honzak has her hand up. I want to recognize Councilmember Honzak, and I just want to remind everyone, we have about 7 minutes left in this discussion. Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you. I share some of the concerns that some of my fellow council members have said, and thank you for this clear, simplified version. One is, I guess the model that I'm seeing here, the difference from maybe anything that's been presented before, is the onus of burden for subjectively, if you will, defining what is excessive noise now would fall squarely on the code enforcement department. Even if a police officer were to respond to the incident, but it was determined to be in the category of excessive noise and not something that was at that moment enforceable, if you will, then it would pass on during office hours to code enforcement. So that burden is moving for those kinds of situations where the noise committee was most relevant, but rarely used, to your staff. Are you concerned about whether that subjectivity falling on your code enforcement staff is going to be unduly difficult for them to manage, even if it's not a lot of cases? I mean, is that where you're getting at this sort of question of litigation, and it might lead to some litigation because, you know, they're in the hot seat kind of for like, well, I don't agree with the decision that, you know, the staff in code enforcement just took. Are you concerned about that, Director McNally?
I think with any kind of code enforcement work, there's some level of subjectivity that is applied, or I should say there is some level of judgment is probably the better way to put that, where someone is going to have to go and they are going to have to evaluate the situation, in this case the noise, and say, looking at the code, looking at, you know, is this intermittent, is this, you know, disruptive, looking at that definition that exists within the code, does this qualify? There will be people who say, you know what, my air horn that blasts every 10 minutes is absolutely not a nuisance noise. I don't know why you would think that. And that is something our code enforcement staff are, you know, incredibly patient and thick-skinned and very capable of working with the property owner to help them understand, or if in some cases where there isn't a resolution, seeing it through to a court case. So yes, it's always tricky, but they are very good at resolving these.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they already get, right, like a lot of residents or whoever, right, having enforcement cases. I guess I feel like the greater the subjectivity and the definition of whatever it is they're supposed to enforce, the more when someone gets frustrated, the more frustrated someone will be and keep coming back, you know, saying, well, this is just, you know, not reasonable. Okay, I totally don't agree, therefore I'm going to litigate. And then I don't know whether we would have some struggles with that. It seems like in some ways it's easier to have the idea that a subjective definition for a word is defined by like a 3-person committee can make that easier. I'm playing devil's advocate here because these are the challenges I would imagine would happen with a very small number of cases. And so anyway, I'm just putting that forward. I don't have a good answer. I think this might be the easiest, most straightforward solution based on all the things we've discussed. The other thing is, I'm sorry if I missed it, but is there a reason that you're not suggesting to put mediation before it would get absolutely a case like that would get decided by code enforcement as an option for 2 parties to use?
Yeah, so the reason why we wouldn't immediately refer to the Conflict Resolution Center is because we would be stepping in, we would be speaking with all the parties involved, going out there ourselves. And so in some ways that will be an informal mediation process. And then we would be rendering kind of a verdict on whether it's, nuisance noise or not. And at that point, we would be issuing a notice of violation if it was, and saying, hey, you have to correct. If we determine it's not, as part of kind of that determination notice, we would certainly say, look, we understand that there is an issue here. At that point, we would assume that there wasn't like any sort of voluntary, kind of agreement reached. And so, here is some resources that you could potentially speak with your neighbor about, even though this isn't, something that we've determined to be a nuisance noise. So there's different levels within this process of kind of starting with, at a staff level, is there some sort of conversation or resolution that we can reach before we may render a judgment? If not, we can render a judgment. And then if we've rendered one, here are some resources that you can use to kind of further your conversation. Because I think at the end of the day, with any process, the goal from at least the HCD side would be to help neighbors get along, and help them find a way that they can live together. Not always the case, but as best as possible. And that's why we would recommend kind of the conflict resolution center towards the end of the process.
Okay. I wonder if it would, I wonder if it could be useful if we were to consider explicitly asking the Conflict Resolution Center to provide some basic mediation or conflict resolution training for that type of engagement on this subjective issue of defining excessive noise and how it's impacting the parties who claim to be impacted. Anyway, but I'm going to leave it at that. We can have another conversation later as needed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Hanzak. Councilmember DeBala.
Yeah, just really quickly, I lean toward option 2. I do think the multifamily piece needs to be clarified, because I agree with Councilmember Gilbert that this is potentially an equity issue. My question has to do with the number of current nuisance noise complaints. So 2025 was a big year. Any reasons that, were they all one place? Was it, what was going on that because if I recall, years before 2023, the number was also 6, 10, 5, 7, really pretty low.
Yeah, I think there were a few reasons. I think one was we had a commercial property that generated a few calls.
Okay, so one property generating a bunch of calls.
But
That's
then,
what I thought.
yeah,
Okay.
typically, for the most part, we're seeing, a smaller number. I think just also, quite frankly, like, yeah, there's certain things like the deer control device, these things pop up. And so some of them were, even though it was a larger number, it was not like a lot of them were not morphing into bigger
Yeah, Rick has
escalations.
told me that typically over the years, it's been 7 to 10.
Yeah, right.
There was one property that generated multiples.
Of
last
which
year.
maybe one would have gone to a noise control, would have gotten it to the noise control board, which was why. So that shows to me that staff resolving many of these issues with the backup of a facilitated board is going to work. And that 2025, my question was, is it an out year? And the answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Schlegel.
Yes, I recognize we're nearing the end of our time. So I think we're facing a little challenge here because we're talking about nuisance noises as the terminology, and the language in the ordinance is when it's not a clear decibel, clear-cut case, it's noise disturbance. And so there may have been some points in this discussion where we were talking past each other. I'm not quite sure when we're talking about, things that happen in multifamily buildings and the like. I'm concerned about needing very clear criteria to minimize what could become very protracted processes if staff are supposed to adjudicate. So the current definition of noise disturbance is unpleasant, annoying, offensive, loud, or obnoxious, or detrimental to the health, comfort, or safety of any individual, or to the reasonable enjoyment of property, or the lawful conduct of business because of the loudness, duration, or character of the noise. And isn't that difficult? Isn't that difficult? Because one person's background noise is another person's like migraine headache. I'm also concerned about having an easy online one-time report because a low threshold for putting in a nuisance noise complaint, while we want to be accessible, a low threshold could generate lots of staff time if it became kind of like a trend or a cultural norm to, you can put in a complaint, and staff, if we go with option 2, staff would be obligated in perpetuity to deal with every single one of them, and there's a lot of unpredictability around workload there.
Appreciate your comments. We don't really anticipate a surge in complaints, the number of complaints. We have ample ways that people can reach us now. Yeah, we're very easy to, and we have portals where people can get information, can get complaints to us. But I appreciate the comment. As far as defining nuisance, I will say, yeah, it's a challenge, but this type of language I have seen in multiple other local governments. They don't really, I've not really seen a really discrete criteria that says, okay, how do you define each and every one of those elements? Decibel levels is, one measure. If it's not in violation, but is that noise disturbance thing, then it by definition becomes more subjective to some degree. But this certainly is, our first approach is to try and resolve, not prosecute a case. So the vast majority of times, and I've seen in other places, you tend to want to, these things you tend to get some level of compliance and, without having to go to the, to the wall.
Great. We have 19 seconds. All right. Well, thank you so much. I just want to make sure that colleagues, this item will come back before the council on February the 18th. And so if you have any additional questions, thoughts, concerns, please share them with staff before the 18th so that they may be able to give you the necessary background information that you're requesting and work to identify any potential adjustments that might need to be made either to the cover memo or to the ordinance itself. And so with that, barring any objections, I'm going to call this meeting to close. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I have a second? All those in favor of me shutting this thing down? Say aye. All right. Everybody have a great night.